Good afternoon, Commissioner Hughes.
Hi, how are you today?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Good,
Audio and video look good. You're good to go, sir.
thanks.
Good afternoon, Layla.
Hey, do I sound okay?
Yes, audio sounds good. Video looks good. You are good to go too.
Thank you.
Sure. Good
Hi,
afternoon.
this is Commissioner McKissick. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can. Sound good.
Any feedback or any problems?
As of right now, no.
Great.
So I think your slight problem might be is because I think you're on a phone and sometimes it or are you on a pad?
I'm using an iPad because the audio on my laptop, you guys can't hear me. Even when you guys took control and tried to manipulate it, there's
Sure.
something internal in the controls where you cannot hear that audio. So I did have an separate audio device with a camera built in, but that was, it seems like that was a bit of a problem. So this has been the fallback. It's always good to have a contingency. Thank God one of the contingencies is working.
Oh, definitely. The only thing is just to remind you, just to please hit mute after you ask your question because we do get feedback from you.
Okay, now Chair Mitchell mentioned the other day, you guys were just gonna control that going off and on, because when I was trying to do it, I think we were having mixed cues as to
Sure.
whether I was doing it or you. So she mentioned if I had questions, you guys would turn it off and on, and that way it wouldn't be this question as to whether I was doing it or not.
Okay, I have no problem doing that. Just, do you want me to do that?
That's fine with me. I don't have a problem with
Okay.
it. That way, there's no mixed cues in terms of whether I'm doing it or whether you're doing it, because I think that's when we end up with a delay.
No problem.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon, Matthew.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Hope everybody's doing well.
Audio sounds good. Video sounds good. You are good to go, sir.
Thank you.
All right, Joanne, this is Charlotte. Just want to check in with you, make sure you're ready to go.
I'm ready to go when you are.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, good afternoon. It's 1 o'clock. Let's go back on the record, please. We are presently with the witness panel of McManus, Smith, and Oliver, Duke witness panel, McManus, Smith, and Oliver. I will remind each of those witnesses that they remain under oath. And at this point in time, we will take questions from the commissioners, beginning with Commissioner Brown-Bland.
Thank you. Mr. Oliver, I think my questions will be for you, but if anybody else on the panel wants to chip in, please do so. So we've been having this discussion about being able to have some sort of handle on the cost as we go through the process, you know, prior to a general rate case, and then just all of a sudden having some costs that, you know, might be questionable or may have ballooned on us. And so I wanted to ask you some questions just primarily about internal processes that might shed some light and be helpful to the situation. So I guess I would ask is internally, does the company or do the companies have a sort of a project status reports where it keeps up with and tracks costs all along?
It's good to talk to you again, Commissioner Brown-Bland. And the answer to that question is yes. We have a project controls organization. In fact, one of my peers at the company is the director of the project controls organization. And it is, they're kind of, I'm going to call it an independent third party that oversees things like unit costs, oversees scope, oversees schedule, and is able to give, I'm going to say, sort of an unbiased report. And we do that monthly. We have a monthly meeting in each of the different jurisdictions that we serve where all the major project work is discussed with the leadership in those areas. I participate in several of those every month, and we go through in detail how we're doing against cost, schedule, and unit cost, which is an important part of these type of projects. So I have a high level of confidence in our processes and procedures around project management. I've been a project manager at the company, and I've led project management teams at the company. I feel very comfortable with that.
Is more than cost covered? Would it cover, like the actual deliverables and whether the expectations of the project are coming to fruition?
Yes. So its cost and its scope is another important piece of that. So scope would be how many, for example, how many circuits have been enabled for integrated bar control versus the plan for that month. So we can see if we're ahead or behind and determine, do we need to allocate more resources or less resources to achieve the schedule that we're trying for. Now, sometimes we'll get ahead, sometimes we'll get behind, but we try and manage that in those particular meetings every month.
And so would it also include, expected benefits of a program? In other words, if you realize that a program just wasn't going to do what it was setting out to do, would that be caught in these kinds of reviews that you're speaking of now?
It would, and actually part of my team is the team that measures those benefits in part of the organization that I manage at the company. And we have benefit projections for many different programs, including the programs that we're looking at for deferral in this case, and track against those.
And are these reviews, do they result in some written reports?
They do.
Or status reports of some sort?
Yes, ma'am. Typically, the minutes of those meetings are tracked and kept, and they get sent out. I, for one, take a look at them and review them for the ones that I'm involved in. I do participate in the Carolinas meetings, and I see those minutes, and folks have a chance to comment, make sure understanding is where it needs to be. So, yes, ma'am, absolutely.
So a minute ago, and this is strictly for my clarification, but you referred to it as an independent third party, but it was at your peer level. Is
Right.
it truly a third party, not to affiliate, not really affiliated with the company, or did you mean something else?
No, they're part of the company. So this is it's a methodology of having a group called project controls at a system level. And the idea was not to have the folks that are evaluating the scope, schedule, and budget of the project actually report to the projects.
All right.
We've tried
So
it multiple.
sort of independent third party to the project.
Right, but as part of the company.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Were you going to say something else?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So is it fair to assume that these grid improvement plan projects that are already underway, the ones that have the spending through May, do they already have this kind of active status reporting happening?
They do.
All right. And just to back up a little bit, is there a regular periodic time that these happen? Is there is it a monthly, a quarterly, or how often? What's the frequency?
This is monthly.
All right. in this type of information, is this something that our public staff might have access to, or to your knowledge, have they had access or looked at these sort of things in the past?
I don't know if they have. We may have provided some things like this in data requests. I'm not sure if they've seen the exact reporting format that they use, but that's certainly something we'll talk about when we get to the reporting format meetings, I'm sure.
And again, just into the what's happening in the back, what the internal processes are with regard to these grid improvement plan type of projects. Would the company have some sort of phased authorization, for before you step up to another level of spending and that kind of thing? Is that part of the process?
Well, I think, I would say that what we're doing today is a very important part of that process, because the deferral accounting treatment really makes a big difference to us in enabling us to move forward with the projects that we've agreed upon in the agreements. As far as scope, schedule, and budget and how that's approved, these tend to be projects that we can track monthly, and we have an annual budget for them. So if we see things are costing more or costing less, we would adjust at that time. The scope is approved annually. So we've got a 3-year plan, and the scope for 2020 is being worked now. The scope for 2021 is pending approval. A lot of it depends on what happens here with this proceeding. And then the scope for 2022 would be approved right before we start 2022. So you have to take a look and see, did we get ahead? Did we get behind? Do we need to adjust? And if some things are not going as we expected, then we need to adjust. And that gives us an opportunity to adjust. If it was just 1 3-year approval, I don't think that's the ideal scenario. We want to make sure we can have an opportunity to adjust as we do our annual plans.
So with the budget authorization, though, so I think you said it was annual budget, right?
Yes.
But so up to the limit of the annual budget, are those who are in charge? I mean, is there authorization all the way through that budget, or are there approval steps along the way? In the interim?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There are approval steps along the way. We're actually in that process right now. And I guess the ultimate approver is the senior management committee, because they take, all the different budgets, into account across all the jurisdictions. But the ultimate say-so for our group, I believe, would be our chief distribution officer. And the chief distribution officer is prepared with all the information that he or she needs at the time to go in and present that case and assure the senior management committee that the programs that we're working on have the value and that they are on track.
So is there a specific process built around, I mean, what's as you go through, let's just say the budget, the year, what's required to keep getting the green light through the end of year budget?
Yeah, so we have a process. So to create the budgets, we use a process that we call enterprise capital optimization. And the distribution and transmission work we're talking about is certainly part of that process. The GIP work, the deferral work, and ultimately it's approved annually. So we've got the 3-year plan. We understand what the benefits will be of that 3-year plan. I believe the annual approval process gives us opportunity to adjust if we need to make any adjustments, whether up or down or depending on what we're seeing, because sometimes things actually cost a little bit less than we thought they might. Sometimes things cost a little bit more. So we need to be able to make those adjustments, but it is an annual process. And
with regard to the cost estimates, as you go through this process, is it typical that the costs change and do the estimates get better, or some call it tighter?
Well, Yes, because we learn more as we go. So the more of a certain type of work we do, the better we are at estimating what the unit cost of that will be. So for example, a good example might be the automated switches that we use for self-optimizing grid. We have learned what it takes to put one of those in. We have done, and we do this in every jurisdiction. We're starting to ramp up, obviously, here in the Carolinas, and we understand what it takes to get it done. And we could take, just for example, let's say we did 30 automated switches in a year. We could take the total cost of that work, divide it by 30, and that's a really good estimation of the average unit cost to do that type of work. So that gives us a pretty good level of confidence, whether you're doing 30 or 300. Now, sometimes the more you do, the less it costs because you can spread some costs out over, more units. But generally, as we do more scope, the cost estimates get tighter because of that reason. And these are the types of programs that are largely driven by units and multiple units of the same type of work. So that lends itself to that type of cost estimating. And I do feel it gets better as we go.
So it's been a while now, but I think there's been testimony that there's variances at this stage built in based on the type of estimate we have, and so there may be 50% or more kind of variation in there. But as we go, would it be your experience on like these grid improvement plans that are projects that are at issue, that you would expect to see that tighten up and kind of, if you can, give some just based on your experience and opinion, some idea of the time frame that you would start to see those get better?
Absolutely. So, we're calling where we're at right now class 4 estimate. Now, the way you do these estimate ranges is really more suited to, let's just say, a large power plant type of project where you do engineering as you progress. So I'd have a high level engineering of the site plan, and then maybe now we're going to get the electrical part of the engineering done and the mechanical part of the engineering done, because it's a very large project at one site that all fits together. This is a little bit different. These are costs largely driven by repeatable unit type work. In other words, as we're implementing the IVVC program, we're going to install capacitor banks on the system. We're going to install capacitor bank controllers on the system. We're going to automate the way we control volt amperes reactive at our substations and the way we control voltage regulation at the substations. And we're going to do it multiple times. It's a very repeatable activity. And that lends itself to what we call parametric cost estimating, which is this practice of unit costs that I described just a little bit earlier. So I feel that I'm going to call it at the lower range of the class 4 estimate, which, as I recall, is, I'm going to say minus 20 plus 30, and that'd be subject to check. So I feel pretty good about that because of the way this work is and the way that we've got historical values for the unit costs that we're doing. So while by the strict definition, because it looks at the amount of engineering done, we're at a class 4, since we're using parametric estimates of work that we've done before, in many cases anyway, and know what it costs to do it at a unit level, and we're simply, instead of doing 10 units, doing 300, we can get a pretty tight estimate. So yes, I do feel that our estimates are solid now. I do feel they will also get better as we go, as we do more units, but I don't feel that we're at the range of the plus 50. If you take a look at those cost estimating methodology tools, they have ranges on the ranges, which is kind of strange. I found that interesting when I get into project management. The upper range is somewhere on a class 4, somewhere subject to check of plus 30 to plus 50. We would be more at the plus 30 range and the minus 20 range. So I think it's just a little difficult to compare this type of work to what those estimate ranges are typically used for, but they do make sense for us and we do use them.
All right, and would the company in going through this kind of phased reporting and review, if you realize that the project's cost or benefits were changing significantly, were not panning out to what was expected, or had gotten far away from the estimated cost of how it started out for you, would the team at Duke pull the plug on the project?
We have a practice at the company called check and adjust. And check and adjust it's a philosophy of continual improvement. So part of our check and adjust process, I think, Commissioner, would be exactly what you described. If we find that the work is not providing the benefit that is intended to provide, if we find that the costs are much greater, or maybe much less, then we need to take the opportunity to check and adjust. That's an important part of an excellent company overall, is the ability to do that. And I believe we are an excellent company. I know we are. So that is something we need to do. And that's something I believe that is built into our processes.
And if it was maybe a little nebulous or on the bubble kind of thing, is that something that you'd have some open and free discussion with the public staff about? If it was on the bubble and you saw something happening, in other words, would there be built into the way the company normally functions some way that the regulator, and in this case, I'm going to call it the public staff, would become alerted?
Well, I'd say we're open to the reporting methodology that makes sense for both. We have committed to create a reporting methodology, I think, jointly with the public staff, and certainly would take that ability into consideration as we're creating that. We're going to show them the facts. The facts are, here's the scope planned, and here's the scope that we've accomplished. Here is the budget that was planned to do that scope, and the budget that it actually costs to do that scope. Here are the benefits we expect from that scope. And as the benefits begin to materialize, because sometimes they don't materialize immediately, we'll be able to track those too. So I feel like the spirit of what you're asking should come directly from those reports. And maybe if it doesn't come from those reports, maybe we've not designed them appropriately and we need to think about designing them better.
And I think what we're talking about, from experience is in the world of project management. And so just in that world, what you do, what your team does is does it fit with the standards that, are adhered to, recognized standards in the world of project management?
Yes, it does.
All right. And is your program in that regard rated by some other entities, or has some what am I trying to say? Some clearances, some and it may not be, but I was just familiar with the different kinds of programs where your internal processes get some sort of certifications.
Well, we follow what we have a project management center of excellence at the company. We call it the PMCOE. They create standards for the different types of aspects of project management, from cost estimating to change control to communication to project reporting. And those standards are published and updated. They are based on tried and true standards across the best practices of project management across many industries. I've studied those project management Center of Excellence standards. I think we've actually, in data requests with the public staff, sent some of those standards over because they had similar questions. So I feel very good about our standards. I know they're there, and our project managers are aware of them and follow them. We also do surveys of our project managers to assess their level of understanding, to see maybe where they think they need assistance and help. I'm not directly involved in that, but our project controls folks, I believe, have done that in the past. I've had a few discussions with my peer who was over that group about that. So yeah, we have standards that we follow that have proven to be effective, not just at Duke, but across many companies in different industries.
All right, well, Oliver, that's right now.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gray,
No questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Clodfelter.
Just a few. A couple of quick things. Mr. Oliver, on Friday, Mr. Strunk testified, and I'll summarize the way I understood it. He says you're putting the cart before the horse by proceeding with a number of the grid improvement programs before you've fully gone through the ISOP exercise, and that the fruits of the ISOP process may or may not change your prioritization or the scope of the projects or the sequence in which you do them, so forth and so on. Would you comment on that testimony from Mr. Strunk? I just want to hear your response.
I'd be glad to, Commissioner Clodfelter. Good to see you again, by the way. So I have routine touch points with the leaders of the ISOP organization. And we talk about this all the time. And the thing about the programs that we've got in the current deferral agreements these are the core of grid modernization. If you were, no matter if we didn't have ISOP or did have ISOP, which we will have the ISOP process, this is where you start. The two-way power flow model from one-way power flow model, the advanced distribution planning tool that we're building as part of this process, the ability to control VAR flow at a central location from a central hub, a central, I guess, program would be the best way to call it, ability to control voltage at the substations and on the distribution lines, and the ability to take AMI meter information and pull that in. This is all basic. This is all things we need to do now to get the grid ready. The fact of the matter is, putting these programs in place is going to make ISOP more effective when we fully implement ISOP. We don't need to wait. Now, I think there's a few misconceptions about the grid improvement plan around, are we looking at different options as we build two-way power flow? The answer to that is yes. As it gets to our field engineers and they determine what are some of the best options to build this two-way power flow model, it is possible that quote non-traditional solutions might come up in this, in this plan. We're going to pick the solutions that are the most cost-effective. Now, as we build the ISOP model, as we build our 10-year load forecast for 8760 hours a year, we're going to learn a lot more. And the ability to seamlessly have two-way power flow on the circuits that we've selected is just going to make it that much more effective. So my peer in ISOP and I agree that we're not putting the cart before the horse. In fact, we're going to make, trying to get this right, we're going to make the horse faster and more effective when we get to the horse by doing these programs.
Thank you for that. I have just a couple of other cleanup things, and then I'll let you go. Over the weekend, I was looking again at the second partial stipulation with the public staff, and I caught something about the description of the programs that I want to just ask you about. It lists the programs that the public staff and the company have agreed to support for deferral accounting treatment. And in the list is conversion to CVR. Now, I had understood earlier when we talked about that, that what you were going to do with the DEP's existing DSDR program was to convert it from a peak shaving mode to the CVR mode. And so when I read that, there's nothing said about the implementation of IVVC in the DEC system. That's just an oversight, isn't it? I should be reading conversion to CVR to also include the implementation of IVVC program at DEC as well. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. The implementation of IVVC and DEC is a core program in the deferral agreements.
I think it may just be an error in expression in the stipulation, because as we had talked about it earlier, what you're converting to CVR is Duke Progress's existing DSDR program. So I just want to be clear on that and be sure my understanding was correct. Last item, and I'll let you go, is one of our staff members, and I apologize to you, I don't have this exhibit in front of me right now, so I can't tell you anything more than what I'm about to ask you. But one of our staff members says that your Exhibit 7 is not very legible. And I don't know whether that's because of the size of the print or whether there's something wrong with the copying or whatever. But if you could re-examine your Exhibit 7, and if it will, I think, probably be apparent to you. I'm sorry I don't have it here in front of me to tell you exactly what's wrong with it. But one of our staff members would like a more legible copy of Exhibit 7.
I'm sure that's something we can arrange. There are a lot of spreadsheets in Exhibit 7, and printing them is difficult, but that is certainly something that our folks should be able to see to. I'm taking a look, and someone's writing a note right now.
I appreciate that, and thank you. That's all I have for you this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Commissioner Duffley.
I have no questions.
Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, it's just a follow-on to Commissioner Klinefelter's question. I think the concern for Exhibit 7 was, as you said, it was just font that was too small to read. Originally, you submitted it to us in Excel files, which was, at least for me, helpful to look at. So I think that's what we were looking for, is just to being able to read those. And I don't know if you've already done those for the settlement, but if you've redone, there's been a lot of mention in your testimony to the benefits of the settlement projects. If they're already done, we'd love to see those as a late filing. We're not asking you to do a complete new set of analysis.
Yes, Commissioner Hughes, we should be able to do that. Now, it's a lot simpler with the settlement filings. It's going to be the self-optimizing grid, cost-benefit analyses, the IVVC cost-benefit analyses, the DEP conversion from the peak shaving mode to the CVR mode. So it should be fairly straightforward. I think it got complicated with some of the other cost-benefit analyses and ran into very small cells and so forth, but this should be a lot more easy to follow in Excel. So I'm just looking over at someone who's much more skilled than me in this area, and they seem to be shaking their head. Yes.
Okay, and there isn't any change in the assumptions or the since you did them originally. If we can also look at the current ones you submitted for each of the programs, and they're still completely valid. The settlement didn't change any of the actual baseline numbers in those cost-benefit analyses.
Not that I know of.
Okay. That's all for me. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner McKissick.
I have several questions. And Mr. Oliver, I'm sure you can help me get a better understanding as how the grid improvement program would move forward. I mean, as it stands today, we have these class 4 estimates, and we have what I would refer to as a kind of broad descriptions of what Duke would seek to accomplish under each specific category of tasks that are related with each program. Now, the thing that I'm interested in knowing is, I guess your next phase will be coming up with a scope for each of these projects. Is that correct?
I would call it refining the scope. So for the IVVC project today, for example, the circuits are already selected. The substations are already selected. They've already, and we have a good unit cost estimate for the scope that we would do for each of the circuits and each of the substations. Now, as that goes into the field, which is happening now, as that goes into the field and our engineers have an opportunity that are much more familiar with each area, they'll take a look at that and make refinements. And the refinements improve the costs, or they improve the scope, or improve the benefits. That's the idea, because originally we looked at it at a high level and said, now based on the system characteristics, here's the circuits that provide the most benefit for our customers. And that's largely going to be unchanged. But as it gets out into the field, I expect our engineers to make improvements upon that. Similarly, for the self-optimizing grid program, and this is in our Exhibit 10, the circuits are already shown that we had selected initially. We actually have a scope that's already been a high-level scope for each of the circuits that shows the number of automated switching devices that would be needed for each circuit. There's a high-level estimate of capacity and connectivity to enable two-way power flow. So we've got a very good starting point for the scope right now. That's what the original estimates are based on. But again, as those go into the field, and I'm seeing this right now, and again, I'm excited to see it because our engineers are taking the high-level project that we have and say, well, I see these three circuits. What I think we can do is make a slight adjustment here to get more customers that would benefit. And that's the type of stuff that we want to leverage. Those are the minor refinements that should happen as we progress through it. So our original scope is already solid. I expect it to be refined as we go through the more detailed scoping process, and the refinement should make us better.
Now, is all of your engineering for each of the projects being done in-house? Or do you contract with outside parties to do any of these engineering that you're referring to?
We do both. The engineering organizations in each of our regions in the Carolinas are able to make those decisions based on the type of work they have, the resources they have, and they will use our internal engineers, and they would also use contract engineers. I don't have an exact number or of how much or which percentages are, but I know that we will use both.
Now, there are different approaches you can take to construction-related projects. You can do all the design up front, have your plans or specifications, as the case may be, and if it was a traditional private sector type of work that was being done, they might go out to bid. Now, I guess I'm trying to get some idea of how you plan to implement things under the grid improvement program. There may be certain components that you pursue that way, other components that you might approach differently. The thing I'm trying to understand, you're familiar with that concept of design build, where you're kind of designing and building all along the way somewhat sometimes, as opposed to having designs that are constructed from the outset. I mean, which approach is it anticipated that Duke will take with the various projects that are part of the grid improvement program at this time?
Okay, great question. Thank you. I think I would characterize it not quite as design build, where that all goes to an end. So design build might be you award a contract to an organization that can do the engineering work and the construction work. And we do that at the company. We don't do it all that often for transmission distribution work, maybe more on the transmission side than the distribution side. And part of that is, and I'm just going to focus on distribution for the moment, is we have already gone through very rigorous qualifications for suppliers. We go through bid opportunities. In other words, our suppliers of relays, our suppliers of the automated switches we're going to use, our suppliers of the controllers for capacitor banks. Those are bid events that are done at typically the enterprise level because we can leverage our scale that way. At least that's my understanding. I'm not directly involved in some of those, but I do on occasion work with supply chain and to give them some information about this. And I have a few teams that work very closely with the supply chain group on that. So being able to leverage that for the material gets us the best price for the material, which is really important because material is a big part of this work. When it comes to labor, we have our internal labor force, but we also have gone through a specific bid event several years ago on the distribution side of the house where we negotiated with multiple parties across different areas of the system. to get the best price, to make sure we had the most access to resources that made sense. So we're going to leverage those particular agreements that are already in place because we feel that got among the best prices that we could get at the time. I'm not saying we wouldn't check and adjust in the future as we go and determine, maybe there are different options for different types of work, but this work is generally repeatable. And we know about the percent of labor for the work, about the percent of material for the work. And we've gone through, I'm going to say, very rigorous bid events for both the labor to install them and the material itself. So it doesn't quite lend itself to the design build approach that it's a traditional way. But that being said, we are a check and adjust organization, and our leadership holds us accountable to that. I hear the term used all the time. I used it. I use it with my teams. So we'll make sure that that continues to be the right approach as we go forward, using the check and adjust process. But as of right now, I feel very comfortable with where we're at.
Follow-up would simply be this. I would assume that the best way of monitoring costs is to, first of all, get as much of that engineering design work done up front and know likely what the anticipated cost might be. When you're kind of engineering it and moving it along and building it out at the same time, particularly when there are outside bidders involved, it may be more difficult to monitor and control the cost.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm trying to address is how that's going to be done effectively, but more importantly, when do you anticipate the rate of spend, not just the total cost of the project? Some projects, 50% of the spending will be in the first quarter of the job. Other projects, the vast majority of the build and the cost incurred is going to be at the back end. Now, when you're monitoring estimates against work in progress, against engineering that's yet to be performed, who is going to be there to reconcile those competing concerns that are necessary to effectively monitor costs on projects of this scope and complexity?
Be glad to address that. I'll start off by, just this type of work that we're doing in the deferral programs, the programs recommended for deferral in the settlement agreements, does tend to be work that I call unit cost type work, which means it's repeatable in nature, and we estimate it largely based on looking at the amount of the work we've done. In other words, we've installed, let's say, 100 of our automated switching devices, and to install those 100 devices, we have spent this amount. When you divide those two numbers, you get a unit cost. That unit cost tends to be a very good indicator of future costs going forward. So we take the unit cost we've seen for the work we've been doing. We try to build in any known changes. In other words, are there contract changes coming up? Is certain material prices going up? So we'll estimate the unit cost based on historical actuals, which is one of the best things you can do, then adjusting for those known changes. So that's a little bit different from types of projects that require advanced levels of engineering in order to move along the estimate range. We're a little different from that for most of the projects in the grid improvement plan. So that to me gives me a higher level of comfort in the costs. It also means that we can track discrete units, whether those units are circuits, whether those units are substations, whether those units are voltage regulators that we're enabling with a two-way flow device that we would need for the IVBC program. All of that can be looked at from a unit perspective. So again, I feel pretty good about where that's at. Now, when it comes to monitoring and cost control, and when do we make adjustments and who is accountable, I have routine meetings with our vice president of, I may not get the title right, vice president of program and project management here in the Carolinas. We talk, I'm going to say at least once a week. The ultimate accountable person is that individual for this work. And that individual understands the work. He has a team of professionals that report to him that spend every day assuring that the scope is done on time and it is done for about the cost we said we were going to do it for, and that it produces the benefits that we envisioned as part of these programs. Now, not only that, that individual has a monthly meeting where he reports out to his peers and to the senior vice president of customer delivery operations. This is a customer delivery example, which is distribution, on a monthly basis. So that individual comes in and reports out and says, here's where I'm at. Here's where things are going well. Here's where we may need to check and adjust. Here's where I might need a little bit of help from, the Eastern region to send some resources over to the Western region. All that is done on a monthly basis and is out there very much for leadership to see and be able to act on. Then we have our project controls organization that puts together the reports for this particular vice president, does their not quite independent third party, but independent from the project management group. They do their look, they give their reports and say, here's where you're at, here's where your costs are, here's where the scope is. Now let's talk about where this is compared to where you're supposed to be. And if any actions need to be taken to bring us back on scope, schedule, and budget, those would be discussed. If it needed to go one level up, that's discussed monthly. That's a meeting I attend. In fact, I think the meeting was last week, so I couldn't attend it last week, but I tend to attend it. That's more pressing matters, but I tend to be able to attend that every month, and I witnessed that firsthand. So I feel very good about our project management processes here, about our ability to adjust when we see that there could be potential things that surprise us. I don't think there's going to be a lot of that here because, we've learned on this work as we've been working it here the past 6 months and a little bit before that. There are other jurisdictions where we've done this type of work before as part of smart grid programs and so forth, and we've learned quite a bit there. We learned to leverage this unit cost methodology. We learned to leverage the program and project management principles and project management center of excellence. So I'm excited to get started.
I guess you touched upon it briefly, but what critical points along the timeline for the various projects? And I think you're indicating monthly, but I'm not sure if for most of these costs to be reviewed and reassessed and to see if they're consistent with what projections are.
Right.
But in terms of kind of a comparison against the cost benefit analysis or an updating of a cost benefit analysis as it relates to each project or each subcomponent of projects, how frequently is that going to occur? It may be different for each project, but I mean, I'm trying to get some sense as to how all of this is going to be tied back together.
Yes, understood. And so we would take and relook at those cost benefit analyses if we see things changing. I would say that's not something you want to do monthly. The scope, schedule, and budget is monthly. However, let's say maybe every 6 months to a year, depending on where our scope, schedule, and budget are and how we're able to measure the benefits. There's a few programs where it's very straightforward to measure the benefits. IVVC is a good example. We know where the voltage started at. We have a baseline voltage before IVVC. We're going to have a voltage after. That's how we measured success for that program in Ohio. It worked very well. So we're going to know very quickly. For something like self-optimizing grid, we want to track the hosting capacity that we add for private solar. We also are going to track the reliability benefits. And sometimes those take a while to materialize. We will enable the circuits for two-way power flow, and in particular, the benefits associated with reliability. They may happen very quickly if there is an event, or it may take a little while for those to materialize. But they will materialize. And that's why I'm thinking maybe every 6 months is the right way to go. That's something we would want to talk to the public staff about to make sure we're meeting their expectations as well. They also have pretty high standards, that's for sure. And we want to make sure we are able to meet them.
how is all of this going to tie back into the public staff? I know you guys have to agree upon a schedule of meetings, but so that everything is, I guess, closely monitored, and there aren't unanticipated substantial changes between what is anticipated today in terms of cost and scope and outcomes compared to what may develop over time as these specific projects move forward. I mean,
Mhm.
how at this point, what do you anticipate that interaction level will be with the public staff? You know, and I know you guys need to work on it a little bit more. I think I read where it's going to be like every other month or something, but I may be mistaken about that. But perhaps you could speak to that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd begin with our internal processes of our monthly reporting methodology, and the rolling of that up to our senior vice president level every month. So that begins it. That's something internal that we have, part of our holding ourselves accountable to scope, schedule, and budget, and our ability to check and adjust. We're going to work with the public staff, probably starting there, leveraging that monthly reporting, determining what more they would like to see, maybe what less they would like to see. There may be a little bit too much in there for what they're wanting to make sure makes sense for them. We'll build those reports together, and I believe it's every 6 months that I believe that's what it says in the agreements, that we would get together and review. And I expect that we will hold ourselves accountable. You know, again, part of our project management methodology, part of check and adjust. If we see things that need to be addressed, we need to make a plan to address them. If we see something that perhaps can't be addressed, that's another thing we need to talk about. And that's where you might make a determination of, is this something we want to hold on for the moment till we're able to figure things out? And I expect those type of discussions are going to happen at those meetings. However, at least how we would do that, I don't expect significant issues to arise with this scope. I'm very familiar with the scope. I understand what we're going to be doing, how we're going to engineer it, how we're going to build it. I understand how the benefits are going to arise. In certain areas, we have done this work before, so we have a high level of confidence in those benefits. But we need to hold ourselves accountable to delivery, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
And the follow-up would simply be this: based upon the scope of the projects that are part of the program at this time, are there any components of the proposed program where you feel as if maybe there isn't quite the level of experience, where it may lend itself more to perhaps going out with some type of a prototype or I won't say prototype, a test version of a smaller scale to see how it may perform before going with a broader, more comprehensive expansion of a program?
Yes, and we have that built into the program. It would be an example with the power electronics program. Power electronics are semiconductor-based devices that can deal with some of the issues we face around intermittency of distributed energy resources in a much faster way. And these are larger devices, so we want to see how those are going to be able to help us. We feel confident they will, but there's a very small scope if you take a look at the settlement agreement on power electronics that we've agreed upon. I'm thinking it's somewhere just north of $1 million. I'm not sure, but it's enough to get us the experience that we need with power electronics to see how it's going to fit seamlessly in with our electromechanical devices that we use today for voltage and bar control. Those devices react just a little bit too slowly sometimes, so augmenting them with power electronics will make a difference. We're going to learn about that, and perhaps that's an area that we grow in the future. But that is an example that's in the plan already that I would call sort of maybe pilotish, if that's a word, in nature. Some of the other programs, the larger ones, the IBVC programs, the self-optimizing grid programs, we have enough experience there and know how to build those. to where we really don't need to pilot those. But there is a couple, and that's the power electronics is a good example.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. I don't have any further questions, Madam Chair.
All right, questions on commissioners' questions, starting with the public staff.
No questions.
All right, Ms. Force, Attorney General's office. Okay. Any interveners have questions on commissioners' questions? All right, any questions from Duke on commissioners' questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have just a couple of questions, and some of these may be more clarifications than questions. Mr. Oliver, Commissioner Clodfelter identified what appears to be an inconsistency in the settlement language or in one of the settlement agreements. You recall that?
I do, Mr. Jeffries.
Okay. I'll make this representation on part of the company. You don't have to. Madam Chair and Commissioner Clodfelter, we'll get with the public staff and get that straightened out and make an appropriate filing to make sure that the record's clear on that issue.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
And on Exhibit 7, Commissioner Hughes asked you some questions that I guess conveyed a note from staff about the difficulty in reading some of the figures in the cost benefit analysis. Do you recall that?
I do, Mr. Jeffries. I think, though, it may have been his staff that was asking the questions versus the public staff, but I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I said the public staff. No, it was commission staff. So, Madam Chair, I know that Mr. Robinson and some of the other folks that have worked on this case originally had some extensive conversations with commission staff on this issue, and in fact republished Exhibit 7 in a format that I believe is legible. And I think and I believe that was refiled with the commission in these dockets. And I'm going to try and hold something up here if I can with one hand because it's kind of this is the Exhibit 7 that is in legible format. So we will undertake to get with commission staff and confirm that you all have legible copies of this sort of Exhibit 7.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jeffries.
And Mr. Oliver, a number of the commissioners asked you questions about, I guess I would, and specifically I'm thinking of Commissioner McKissick, but sort of just asking questions about, how certain is the company in what they're doing here, the scope of what they're doing, and will they have it under control? And it's true, isn't it, that you guys answered a tremendous number of data responses in this, or data requests in these dockets about your GIP proposals, correct?
That is correct. I think there were approximately 2,700 interrogatories that we answered. We're still answering some right now about work and service and working hard to get those out.
Madam Chair, I don't know if the commission would find this helpful or not, but we would certainly be willing to file the company's GIP data responses in the record so that the commission could have those available to them if that's something that the commission would find helpful.
All right, Mr. Jeffries, just so I'm clear, your offer is to file what specifically? Would you please restate?
The grid improvement plan data responses that were prepared by the company in response to questions from the public staff and other interveners on the GIP proposals in both cases.
And can you help me understand the volume of documents?
It would be substantial. I think Mr. Oliver testified it would be something like responses to something like 2,700 data requests on these issues.
Understood. Well, Mr. Jeffries, let's do this. Let me consult with my colleagues and we will make a request of the company with respect to the documents that we would like for you all to provide us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not trying to bury the commission in paper, but if there was a concern about not having all the information, we'd like you to have it.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Oliver, you don't happen to have a copy of the partial settlement with the public staff on the grid improvement plans handy, do you?
I'm looking over across the room at my support, and they're trying to see. For now, let's say I do not. I have a summary.
Okay. Yeah, let's not hold things up. I think we can go through this. I know you've read the settlement and you understand it. But there's some substantial requirements in the settlement agreement that are aimed directly at this issue of monitoring and testing and verification of the costs and the benefits of your GIP proposals under the settlement, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I will represent to you that each one of these elements I'm about to ask you about are in the settlement. But I mean, one of the things is that you've agreed to work with the public staff to develop a biannual reporting requirement, correct?
I agree.
And that requirement would track the costs of each program. Do you agree with that?
Yes.
And would also require you to report on the programs on a circuit and substation level. Does that sound familiar?
It does.
And to provide a summary of actual versus projected benefits.
Yes.
And then also an obligation to provide reporting data and analysis that if you make any material changes to the SOG or IVVC scope. Does that sound right?
It does.
And you have a separate obligation to engage in an ongoing cost effectiveness evaluation of these programs, correct?
We do. And I've got the document here on a computer now, if we need to go through it that way.
Yeah, I don't think so. I've just got one more point because this is in the record. So, but one thing I did notice when I was looking at the settlement is that there's a statement in there that the first one of these reports will cover the last 6 months of 2020, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the commission's not going to have to wait a real long time before it sees the first one of these reports, because you'll be reporting pretty quickly after this program gets started, correct?
I agree, and I think that was purposeful in nature.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, that's all the questions I have for Mr. Oliver.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jeffries. At this point in time, I don't believe I need to entertain any motions related to these witnesses, so you all may step down. And I believe that completes witness testimony on the topic of grid improvement plan. And we will now move to affordability. And let's see, Duke, you may call your witness.
Good afternoon. This is Bo Summers. Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Companies would call Ms. Kenesha Barnes.
Mr. Summers, just to flag, there may be some changing of the rooms. And so if maybe we could have a minute or two to make sure that Ms. Barnes gets to her location, we'd appreciate it.
Okay, understood. Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a 5-minute recess? We will go off the record and we'll come back on at 2:05. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I see Ms. Barnes has appeared on camera. So let's go ahead and go back on the record, please. Ms. Barnes, let's get you under oath. Raise your right hand. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Summers.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Good afternoon, Ms. Barnes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Summers.
Would you please state your name for the record?
Kanisha Barnes.
And what do you do for a living?
I work for Duke Energy Carolinas as the Regulatory Affairs Manager.
All right, and what is your business address?
My business address is 550 North Tryon Street, Charlotte, North Carolina.
And you filed rebuttal testimony in both the Duke Energy Carolinas and the Duke Energy Progress cases, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, beginning first with your DEC testimony. On or about March the 4th, 2020, did you cause to be pre-filed rebuttal testimony in that docket number E7 sub 1214 consisting of approximately 10 pages?
I did.
And do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed DEC rebuttal testimony?
Yes, I do.
All right, would you please identify that one for us?
Yes, I'll be glad to. So on page 6 of my DEC rebuttal testimony, line 1, the first complete sentence reads, the company also agrees with condition 6. The correction should reflect actually condition 5.
All right, thank you. Do you have any other changes?
No, I do not.
So if I were to ask you the same questions with that one correction in your DEC pre-filed rebuttal testimony here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chairman, I will move that Ms. Barnes' pre-filed rebuttal testimony be entered into the record in this proceeding and copied into the record as if given orally from the stand in the DEC rate case dockets at the appropriate time.
Hearing no objection to your motion, Mr. Summers, it will be allowed.
Thank you. Ms. Barnes, did you also cause to be pre-filed on or about May 4th, 2020 rebuttal testimony in the Duke Energy Progress case, which is docket number E2 sub 1219, consisting of approximately 5 pages?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed rebuttal in the Duke Energy Progress case?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chairman, I would move that Ms. Barnes' pre-filed rebuttal testimony be entered into the record in this proceeding and copied into the record as if given orally from the stand in the DEP rate case dockets at the appropriate time.
All right, hearing no objection, your motion is allowed.
Thank you. Ms. Barnes, have you prepared a summary of your testimony?
Yes, I have.
Would you please give that to the commission now?
Yes. The portion of my rebuttal testimony related to the consolidated hearing topic of affordability responds to portions of the direct testimony of public staff witness Jack Floyd and portions of the direct testimony of North Carolina Justice Center, North Carolina Housing Coalition, Natural Resource Defense Council, and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, which I will refer to collectively as the NCJC Group, witness John Howard, and portions of direct testimony of Center for Biological Diversity and Appalachian Voices witness Roy McElmore regarding the company's low-income support and programs and customer affordability issues. Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress have filed partial settlements with the public staff and the NCJC Group, which further address or resolve affordability issues as to those parties. The companies fully understand that many of our customers have difficulty paying their energy bills, and affordability is an important issue for all customers. During the current COVID-19 pandemic, we know that even more customers are facing hardships, and with the Commission's approval, we have waived disconnections for non-payment, late fees, reconnect fees, and other charges in recognition of these unprecedented circumstances. In his direct testimony, company witness Stephen DeMay acknowledged affordability concerns and proposed a collaborative process to seek input on and recommend ways we can expand the company's low-income energy assistance programs. In their testimony, witness Howard and witness McEmore proposed various definitions of and approaches to affordability issues. For this reason, the companies believe that a stakeholder process with guidance from the Commission is the most effective forum to discuss these issues, propose and evaluate options, and then make recommendations to the Commission in a future docket. Witness Floyd set forth parameters for the stakeholder process in his direct testimony, and the companies agreed with public staff's recommendations. In order to further address affordability issues, the companies have agreed in their partial settlements with the public staff to contribute a combined $10 million in shareholder dollars to the Energy Neighbor Fund and the Share the One Fund in 2021 and 2022. In our settlements with the NCJC Group, the companies have agreed to contribute a combined total of $6 million in shareholder dollars to the Helping Home Fund over 2 years. The Helping Home Fund program delivers weatherization services, heating and cooling system repairs, appliance replacements, and critical health and safety repairs at no cost to DEC and DEP customer households at or below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines. The companies have also agreed to collaborate with the NCJC Group on the design of a low-income energy efficiency demand-side management pilot and an on-tariff financing pilot. In combination with the low-income collaborative stakeholder process proposed by the companies, we believe that these additional commitments provide meaningful opportunities to address affordability issues in our communities. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony related to affordability issues.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes. Chair Mitchell, none of the parties indicated they have any cross for Ms. Barnes, and she's available for any questions the commission may have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Summers. I will entertain questions from the commission, starting with Commissioner Brown-Bland.
I have no questions.
Okay, Commissioner Gray.
No questions.
Commissioner Clodfelter.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Barnes.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Clodfelter.
If you know, how long has Duke, Ohio, been operating the percentage of income payment program?
I know the program has been in the state of Ohio since, I believe, in 1983. I don't know specifically, though, when actually Duke Energy Ohio started operating the program.
You may not know this, but I'll ask it just to see. Do you have any idea how many of Duke Ohio's customers participate in that program?
I do not know how many customers have participated. I do know that when talking with some of our fellow employees in Duke Energy Ohio, the number of employees customers continues to increase. There have been some revamping of the program recently where more customers can participate, but the exact number I don't have, but that's some information we'll be glad to follow up with you on.
Thank you. I would appreciate that. Is there any sort of internal analysis or study that Duke Ohio has done about how the program has worked?
That I'm not aware of.
Do you know if there have been any third-party studies or reviews of how that program has worked in Ohio?
I don't know that there's been any reviews. I know there are reports that have talked about how the program is operational in Ohio for all of the IOUs that are regulated to operate the program. But the effectiveness or the analysis of it, that I'm not aware of.
Have either, to your knowledge, have either Duke Carolinas or Duke Progress undertaken any sort of analysis or study toward possible implementation of that program in North Carolina?
I'm not sure about possible implementation of the program in North Carolina. I will say that I am sure, along with other employees in Duke Energy Carolinas, are familiar with the program, understand how the program operates as it relates to customer eligibility and how customers participate in the program, along with the recovery mechanism and the regulation by the Ohio Commission. I'm sure that you're aware of this, Commissioner Clotfield, through commission order, I'll call it PIP, came to be. Since the implementation of PIP, there have been several statutory updates that have caused the program to evolve from that standpoint. But actually, what type of deep dive analysis for the Carolinas, that I'm not aware of.
Thank you. Appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Commissioner Duffley?
I have no questions.
Okay. Commissioner Hughes? Commissioner Hughes, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm not sure if this is what you just mentioned, but I think Duke, and I'm not sure if it's Duke Carolinas or Duke Progress, offers some type of income-based program now, I believe maybe for senior citizens. Could you comment at all about how that program has worked and whether that program is limited based on a budget or limited based on interest?
Yes, Commissioner Hughes. I think you're referring to the SSI program that Duke Energy Carolinas offers to eligible customers. Right now, we have, I think at the end of 2019, we had approximately 9,000 customers that were on that program. This right here is a program where eligibility is actually determined through the Department of Social Services here in North Carolina. And as you mentioned, there are eligibility requirements that for customers who are elderly, disabled, that can apply for that program. And through that, they receive a reduced amount for the first 350 kilowatt hours of their monthly energy usage.
And is that overall budget just limited by how many people apply and are deemed eligible, or is there a internal limit on the size of that? And does that money come from other ratepayers, or is there a third party? Is it some sort of like LIHEAP coming from a different source?
Yes. So I'm not aware that there's a cap on the annual participation or the participation in the program, Commissioner Hughes. I think the recovery of the cost, I would say that Witness Bureau probably would be a better witness to address how we get the recovery of the difference in the cost for what the customers are charged in comparison to what are actual costs to serve those customers.
Okay, thank you very much. No further questions.
Commissioner McKissick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just one or two quick questions. Let me first follow up on the last question that Commissioner Hughes asked you about. It's my understanding, if I were a senior citizen and was interested in that program, that if I call like a 1-800 number for Duke, they would not automatically refer me to a local Department of Social Services or to an entity that could, I guess, pre-qualify me to participate. Do you know anything about the way that program operationally works today so that people are aware that it is available as a resource or tool?
Yes, that's a great question, Commissioner McKissick. So as with Duke Energy Carolinas, what we do is we have an annual bill insert that we share information to customers annually that lists all of our rates. It also lists, although SSI is not a rate, but it does have information in there, so customers receive that information annually. And my understanding also is as customers qualify with the Department of Social Services, they're actually receive information that way about the SSI rate.
So other than the annual bill insert or through, I guess, of those who are monitoring programs for social services, there wouldn't be any other way of learning about it? Is that, I mean, if I was just a senior citizen and made a call to your 800 number, I mean, I guess would I even be directed or become aware of it any other way? I mean,
I don't believe that there is a proactive outbound communication, like if you called and you're a certain age, that we're actually proactively communicating that information. I think, like I said earlier, we shared it with a bill insert, but because the Department of Social Service qualifies those customers and they have to have other qualifications outside of just the age factor, that information usually is actually shared through that agency versus the company proactive to, for example, any customer that meets that age threshold.
Thank you. I mean, one thing that occurs to me, it'd be great if there were perhaps a more proactive way of doing it so that people were aware, even if it was public service announcements or something. I don't know. I'm sure there's a whole range of options that might be open. In terms of what's anticipated, Duke is going to do in terms of trying to establish this, what I call group of stakeholders to come up and craft policies. What's the timeline for how that might be implemented if you have one established at this time, and how is it envisioned that it will be structured so that the information that they gather and collect and recommendations that they, I guess, come up with, if they can reach consensus, would be brought back in a timely way?
Yes. So Commissioner McKissick, as it relates to the timeline, I think in Witness Floyd's testimony on behalf of the public staff, he has put some recommendations out there that as it relates to the collaborative process that the company agrees to. One of those recommendations is really say a 12-month time frame that through the stakeholder process, the learnings would be shared back with the commission. In advance, I would say, of that 12-month time frame, during the process of actually some report backs back to the commission so that they would understand how the work is progressing with between the company, the public staff, and other low-income stakeholders. And I would say, I think to your second question on how it would be structured, I think part of that is there's still conversation around how it would be structured. I think one of the things that we would do is once the commission issues an order, ideally, if the commission issues an order directing the company to move forward with the collaborative along with the public staff's engagement and involvement, we would look at that and initially be reaching out to identify interested parties who want to be a part of that stakeholder process. And those interested parties then would be able to share that. And then from there, we would start convening. I wouldn't want to say that we put a lot of rules around the stakeholder process. I think part of that is what we will establish with the stakeholders when they're identified, and we initiate that work.
Quick follow-up. Is it envisioned that once the stakeholders meet within this year, their ideas and initiatives that come forward, that would be brought to us separately, independently, outside of a rate case?
Yes. That is correct. So the thought is at this point, that it would be brought outside of a rate case. And I think depending on what the work is, if it's something that's tied to a rate case, we'll work through that. But I think we talked through some of the low income programs that we've talked about as part of the settlement agreement and other things, of course, that can evolve from the stakeholder process. That work we wouldn't believe is contingent upon waiting to the next rate case. What we would think is that work would come forward whenever it is, pulled together, structured, and vetted out by the collaborative, and would be handled outside of like a separate docket outside of this rate case docket.
Excellent. I think that's an excellent way of proceeding. One of the things Commissioner Kleinfelder spoke of in terms of the program out in Ohio, I've heard him speak of that before, and I hope that those types of things that Duke is doing already in other jurisdictions are things that will be shared, as well as the whole universe of things that might be done by other utilities across the country. So I look forward to seeing how this collaborative process unfolds. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no further questions.
All right, questions on commissioners' questions. We'll start with public staff. Okay, no questions from the public staff. Questions from the Attorney General's office? Okay, no questions from the Attorney General's office. Questions from any other interveners on the commissioner's questions? All right, questions from Duke?
But just a couple, Chair Mitchell. This again,
Okay.
Summers. Thank you. Ms. Barnes, first following up on the questions from Commissioner Kleinfelder about the Ohio program that you discussed with him. To your understanding, is that program in Ohio based upon legislative action?
Yes. Yes, yes.
Sorry, I should have used my space bar to unmute there. Thank you for that. And to, I believe Commissioner McKissick just asked you this, but I want to make sure it's absolutely clear on the record. If would a program similar to what Duke has in Ohio be something the company's willing to consider and discuss as part of the collaborative process that would follow after this rate case?
Yes, I would say yes, Mr. Summers, it is. I mean, we are not going into the collaborative process with a thought of, hey, this is what's off the table. I think that's right there is the value of the collaborative process, having open discussion with low-income stakeholders across the state to hear what programs they're aware of, and for us to come up with a suite of offerings that may be energy efficiency, may be bill pay assistance that can help our low-income customers here in North Carolina. So that too would be one of those programs that we would be open to discussing.
Also following up on a question from Commissioner McKissick about what information do customers have about the Duke Energy Carolinas SSI program? And are you familiar with what happens when a customer calls in the 1-800 number or whatever number they have to contact Duke Energy?
I am.
In fact, didn't you start your career working in the call center before you progressed with multiple management positions to the position you hold today?
Yes, I did. I actually started off my career with Duke Energy with, thank you for calling Duke Energy. How may I help you?
Great. And if a customer called you, Ms. Barnes, and you answered the phone for Duke Energy and asked them how they were doing, and they said, I'm interested in learning about this SSI program, what would you have done? Or what are Duke Energy call center specialists instructed to do if a customer asks about that program?
If the customer asks about the program, the Duke Energy specialist has information about the program. They can give the customer information about how they would contact the Department of Social Services for more information. They can actually go ahead and explain to them at least high level what are the eligibility requirements. So at least they have that information before contacting the Department of Social Services for more information about SSI.
Thank you. Chair Mitchell, I don't have any further questions for Ms. Barnes. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Barnes, we appreciate your being here today, and you may step down.
Thank you.
All right, we are with the public staff now. Ms. Floyd, you may call Ms. Edmondson, you may call your witness.
All right. The public staff now calls Jack Floyd to the stand.
All right, Mr. Floyd, let's get you under oath. Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Edmondson, you may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Floyd, please state your name and business position for the record.
My name is Jack Floyd. I'm an engineer with the Energy Division of the Public Staff.
Mr. Floyd, on February 18th, 2020, did you cause to be pre-filed in docket number E7 sub 1214 direct testimony consisting of 60 pages in Appendix A, as well as 4 exhibits, namely Floyd exhibits 1 through 4 to your direct testimony?
Yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that pre-filed direct testimony?
I do not.
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
And do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your direct testimony?
No.
And Mr. Floyd, on March 25th, 2020, did you cause to be pre-filed in that same docket supplemental testimony consisting of 5 pages and 4 exhibits, namely supplemental Floyd exhibits 1 through 4?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed supplemental testimony?
No.
And if I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
And do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your supplemental testimony?
I do not.
I move that Mr. Floyd's pre-filed direct testimony and supplemental testimony be entered into the record in the docket number E7 sub 1214 and copied into the record as if given orally from the stand. at the appropriate time, and that Mr. Floyd's exhibits attached to those testimonies be marked for identification as Floyd Direct Exhibits 1 through 4 and Floyd Supplemental Exhibits 1 through 4.
All right, Ms. Edmondson, hearing no objection to your motion, it will be allowed.
Thank you. Mr. Floyd, on April 13th, 2020, did you cause to be pre-filed in docket number E2 sub 1219, direct testimony consisting of 45 pages and Appendix A, as well as 4 exhibits, Floyd Exhibits 1 through 4, to your direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No,
If I asked you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
they would.
Do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your direct testimony?
I do not.
Mr. Floyd, on April 23rd, 2020, did you cause to be pre-filed in the same docket supplemental testimony consisting of 5 pages, 4 exhibits, namely supplemental Floyd Exhibits 1 through 4?
Yes,
Do you have any changes or corrections to that pre-filed supplemental testimony?
I do not.
And if I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to the supplemental testimony?
No.
I move that Mr. Floyd's pre-filed direct testimony and supplemental testimony be entered into the record in the DEP rate case dockets and copied into the record as if given orally from the stand at the appropriate time, and that Mr. Floyd's exhibits attached to these testimonies be marked for identification as Floyd Direct Exhibits 1 through 4 and Floyd Supplemental Exhibits 1 through 4.
All right, hearing no objection to your motion, it will be allowed.
Mr. Floyd, do you have a summary prepared on the issue of affordability?
I do.
And would you please give that summary?
Okay. The purpose of my testimony today is to present the public staff's analysis, recommendations regarding low income and affordability issues pertinent to the base rate cases. In both companies' direct testimony, Duke witness Stephen DeMay discusses several ways the company proposes to assist low-income customers with their bills, including, among other things, a 20 basis point reduction in the return on equity. It is almost impossible to gauge the significance of this offer, especially in light of the public staff witness's recommendation of a return on equity of 9%, or the company's settlements with some of the other parties with an ROE of 9.75%. Further, an ROE reduction does not target assistance to only low-income customers. Mr. DeMay also proposes to initiate the stakeholder process to discuss ways to help low-income customers with their utility bills, including a low-income bill credit on the basic facilities charge, a bill roundup program, and changes to the supplemental security income, or SSI, price discount. On January 20th, 2020, the Commission issued an order directing the public staff in its testimony in both cases to address the appropriateness of Lifeline rates, to review the SSI income discount for DEC, compare that SSI discount to other affordability programs and tariffs, provide an overview of other DEC-related affordability and tariff programs, and to address the merits of using a minimum bill concept rather than a fixed customer charge. With respect to Lifeline rates, such rates provide a fixed amount of electricity at no cost, or at least a subsidized cost, and have been around for many years. The typical mechanism to pay for those costs has been to use an inclined block rate design. This type of design is not a cost-based rate design, and it shifts the recovery of revenue to higher blocks of consumption. Consumers buying few kilowatt hours would not be contributing appropriate amounts toward the fixed or toward the recovery of fixed cost. This exacerbates the need for future rate cases. Further, these rates may not always benefit low-income customers because they are not necessarily low usage customers. The public staff's policy has been to support cost-based rates, and Lifeline rates are inconsistent with that policy. With respect to the SSI discount, I reviewed a 1981 study performed by the Research Triangle Institute that was the basis for the SSI discount some 40 years ago. The Commission initially established the SSI discount to collect data on Lifeline type rates pursuant to a legislative mandate. The SSI discount was based on the premise that those recipients used small quantities of electricity, had a lower percentage of coincident peak usage, and had higher overall on-peak usage than other non-SSI customers. However, there was little overall cost difference between SSI and non-SSI customers. Ultimately, the Commission chose to retain the SSI discount, which has endured in each successive rate case with little to no debate. The RTI study is very likely not relevant to today's electricity consumption by SSI customers. Peak usage, low profiles, appliance, and other end uses of electricity today are likely different than they were in the late 70s. Another 2010 study by the Edison Foundation found that low-income customers may be more efficient to serve and that they responded well to dynamic pricing signals. And this type of data bears some further study. Duke Carolina's initial application, filed September 30th of last year, did not provide any information in this case to suggest any differences between SS and non-SSI customers. Therefore, given the potential for differences in usage and Duke's offer for a stakeholder process, the public staff recommends that the Commission study the SSI discount further, including the possibility of a replacement mechanism that would have a broader application to assist more low-income customers. With respect to other affordability tariffs, my testimony briefly summarizes the single affordability tariff offered by Duke Energy Ohio. Floyd Exhibit 3 provides a non-exhaustive list of other affordability tariffs used by other utilities around the country that I reviewed. The most prevalent model is one that offers a total bill or flat dollar discount and uses eligibility criteria based on a customer's participation in other governmental assistance programs. The public staff is generally supportive of a mechanism that sets rates for service based on cost causation, and to do that first, then provide a discount for eligible customers. I do not recommend any particular mechanism at this time, but believe that the stakeholder process would be the best forum to discuss affordability, as well as the means of a mechanism to achieve any affordability policies the Commission chooses to adopt. With respect to the minimum bill concept, that concept provides that all customers will contribute a minimal level of revenue to the company, regardless of usage. Several non-residential rate schedules for both companies include such a provision. Duke Progress residential time of use schedules also includes such a provision. These provisions recover a portion of the fixed cost of utility service, and this would include the basic customer or facility charge and an additional level of cost. The public staff supports basic charges, which are based on cost causation, while other parties raise concerns over the level and calculation of such charges. My testimony provides an illustration of the relationship between the basic charges and energy charges and how they work together to produce the revenue the companies receive for service. Minimum bill provisions do not necessarily replace a basic customer charge because such charges are not intended to recover only fixed cost. Basic charges recover customer-related cost and a portion of demand-related cost, which do include some fixed cost. Minimum bills recover a portion of fixed costs regardless of how those costs are incurred. It is important to understand that the combination of rate elements in any schedule, that would include the basic charge, a demand charge if applicable, and energy charge, all have to be designed to recover the cost necessary to serve the customer. Any rate element that is not appropriately priced or structured simply shifts the recovery of cost onto another rate element. And any rate schedule that fails to recover the fixed cost of service simply shifts the burden of recovery onto other customers and customer classes. The public staff is very concerned about the issue of rate design because it is becoming increasingly important in a world of increasing utility costs, such as grid improvement and coal ash, as well as the impacts related to distributed energy resources, energy storage and microgrids, and electric vehicles. It is crucial that rate designs support future utility service and minimize or mitigate the increasing burden of paying for utility service onto those who are already struggling to afford utility service and the customers who do not have the means to avoid such costs. The issue of rate design goes to the heart of affordability. My testimony concludes by asking the Commission to approve the stakeholder process proposed by the companies and to provide guidance on the policy objectives the Commission would like the stakeholder process to consider. My testimony includes recommendations for a timeline for that process, a definition of affordability, investigating the success of existing rates and programs to address affordability, investigating the cost to serve low-income customers, and establishing a reporting protocol on the stakeholder process itself. That concludes my summary of on the affordability issues.
The witness is available for cross-examination.
All right.
Good.
Mr. Neal, you may proceed.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Good afternoon, Mr. Floyd. How are you today?
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Referring to this issue you just discussed in your summary and in your testimony about fixed utility costs, you would agree that to the question of what is and what is not a fixed cost is a matter of controversy in this case, isn't that right?
As in every case, it is, yes.
And you would also agree, you mentioned this issue of a concern around those low-income customers who happen to be high-usage customers, not necessarily receiving a benefit from a lower fixed customer charge. Isn't that right?
Yes, I do. And I base that on what I consider a very fundamental question that I ask in every rate case that I've reviewed in the last 10 or so years. I typically ask the companies to produce what I call a bill frequency analysis. And what that will show is the number of bills in the test year that fall into certain levels of usage categories. And what I see is that for Duke in progress, about 20% to 24% of the bills by 500 kilowatt hours or less per month. And so the majority, 3/4 of the bills that we see are buying much higher volumes of electricity on a per bill basis. That is a key piece of information in my mind of we don't have that many low usage bills.
And sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Mr. Floyd, just to be clear, that data provided by Duke is not given by income level, isn't that right?
That's right. Rates are not set on income level, but they do. I reckon they do impact low income customers as they impact all customers. And what I was going to suggest earlier is that if you take out the number of net metered bills, which are several thousand, you have even fewer bills that buy 500 kilowatt hours or better.
And Mr. Floyd, excuse me. And again, sorry to just to be clear, there's this is idea of 500 kilowatt hours or less a month. There's no set definition of what constitutes a low usage customer or not. Like that's not some sort of threshold.
The 500 is simply a exercise on my behalf because the average usage is about 1,100 to 1,200 kilowatt hours a month. I take roughly half of that, and just as a benchmark in my assessment.
And you would agree, though, that for low-income customers, regardless of usage, the value of investing in energy efficiency or conservation measures would be reduced to the extent you're recovering more from the fixed charge than the volumetric rate. Isn't that right?
It would be slightly, and this kind of goes to some of the heart of the issue. By loading all of your revenue recovery potential in a kilowatt hour charge, some of that is appropriate, but if you load more of that and then customers who have the means to avoid buying kilowatt hours don't buy them from Duke Energy, that exacerbates an issue of utility revenues that for future rates, that becomes a problem for people who do not have the means to implement efficiency or to adjust their usage to take advantage of time of use or something like that. It is a real question in this day and age, and I agree with you that efficiency is promoted a little easier if the kilowatt hour charge and the rate is higher. That is a mathematical certainty.
And that's really all I was asking. Is that if you break up the rate,
right,
there's just basic math that to the extent you're recovering too much, or you're recovering more from the fixed charge, you are reducing the value that customer can possibly receive from any conservation or energy efficiency measures. Correct?
That's right.
Right.
And under
so that's all I was asking.
Right,
Mr.
right.
Floyd.
And I understand, but what I want everyone to understand is that is somewhat of a historical or traditional way of looking at it. Energy efficiency can also be promoted by various other mechanisms outside of just looking at how much am I going to save on a kilowatt hour, cents per kilowatt hour rate. And the utility service of the future is going to have to start to look at different mechanisms outside of looking at recovering all cost in a kilowatt hour charge. That's my point that I want. Anytime I hear efficiency, and I have been working, as you well know, in the efficiency aspects of utility service since Senate Bill 3 was passed.
And again, Mr. Floyd, putting aside what the utility rates of the future might or might not hold, just so the record is clear, you agree that if we have a fixed, more recovery from a fixed charge than from the volumetric rate, that reduces the economic value to customers from energy efficiency.
Under a traditional setting, yes.
That's right. Under the rates we have now.
Yes.
And so putting aside any hypothetical rates we may have in the future. Now, So the data you've received from Duke about customer usage, as we've said, doesn't break that data down by income.
No.
So to the extent that data shows that on average, lower income customers are lower usage customers, you have no reason to dispute that based on the data you've received from Duke Energy, isn't that right? Again, I'm not
You
asking
may have to say that again.
Asking, yes, to the extent that there is.
Sorry, if you gentlemen can speak one at a time, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay.
To rephrase the question, if, for example, we have data from the US EIA REX surveys that shows on average lower income customers are lower usage customers, nothing you've received from Duke Energy in this case would tend to show something different. Isn't that right?
That's true. We ask about that, and Duke does not track their customers based on income when it comes to rate setting.
Thank you. That's all I was asking.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Floyd, you heard testimony from Ms. Barnes earlier this afternoon. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And in your role at the public staff, you participate in the Duke Energy Collaborative relating to the company's energy efficiency programs.
I do.
And from the collaborative or otherwise, have you gained familiarity with the Helping Home Fund that Ms. Barnes also talked about this afternoon?
A little bit. It's as I basically understand it, it's a bill assistance primarily type program.
So as Ms. Barnes described it, it was a program that provides critical health and safety repairs and a suite of energy efficiency upgrades.
Yes, among other things, yes.
Isn't that right?
Yes.
So,
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to remind you, please do not speak over one another so the court reporter can hear you.
thank you, Chair Mitchell. Well, and Ms. Barnes also mentioned that the as part of the second settlement with the public staff, that there was a $5 million commitment from the companies to bill payment assistance with regard to the public staff's settlement.
That's right.
And you would agree that that commitment will provide benefits to thousands of North Carolina families, isn't that right? Pardon me.
I do not know how many it will provide assistance to.
And you would also, well, regardless, would you agree that the commitment made by Duke in its settlement with the Justice Center and the rest of my clients and the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association to provide a $6 million infusion into the Helping Home Fund over the next 2 years will provide some real assistance to families in need in North Carolina?
It will provide assistance, yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Okay, is there any additional cross-examination for the witness? All right, Ms. Edmondson, any redirect?
I just have one question. Mr. Floyd, you were talking about that lower income customers would generally be, or on average, be lower usage customers.
Yes.
But our lower usage customers, do you think that universe are necessarily lower income customers?
Not at all. Some elderly retired customers may have decent incomes. They're certainly not low income customers, but yet they may be low usage.
And you mentioned net metering today. Would that be one of the low usage customers?
It could be. Net metered customers have very few net kilowatt hours, if any, during the year on their bills, and that stems from residential customers primarily who have rooftop solar.
Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have.
All right, questions from commissioners, beginning with Commissioner Brown Bland.
No questions.
Okay, Commissioner Gray.
No questions.
Commissioner Clodfelter?
Just a couple. Mr. Floyd, deja vu all over again. The last Duke Energy progress rate general rate case was just 3 years ago, about this time of the year, a little bit later, but we were talking about exactly the same topics.
We had the conversation. Yeah. We
Yes.
had the conversation in Dominion too.
We did have it in Dominion. We had it in Duke, Carolinas about 2.5 years ago. Are you aware of anything that in the past 3 years has prevented the companies or the public staff or any of the stakeholders from convening a working group and getting on with the issue over the last 2 to 3 years? Was there any obstacle that prevented that from happening?
No, but obstacle is a strong word. There's certainly some formidable hurdles to navigate, or moguls, if you want to say it that way. I hate these words, but my testimony, I think, gives you a flavor of the trepidation that the public staff has with doing anything, and I'll give you a couple of examples. First, there's precious little, if any, statutory or regulatory framework to compel the companies to do something. That's why I think I close my testimony on this issue, seeking commission guidance. I think all the parties need something from the commission of how to navigate this topic. And the reason being is that there is very likely to be a subsidy by other customers to pay for it. If the adoption of any type of bill discount mechanism is likely going to create a subsidy situation that is going to have to be determined which customer classes pick up that burden. The public staff has always thought that rates should be based on cost first. If I say it once, I'll say it 100 times. Once that's done, then I think the commission needs to give the parties some guidance as to where we go. And that will give everybody a better feel and understanding of really what the policy the commission wants to implement, what it's going to cost customers. And I think that transparency is important if we're going to ask the rest of the rate-paying body to pick up the burden.
If we want this to happen, we just need to tell you to get on with it. And we didn't do that 2 years ago, and we didn't do that 3 years ago, and we didn't do that last year. That's your answer, right? We just need to tell you to get on with it.
I wouldn't say it that bluntly, but the issue has come into more focus now than at least in the time that I've been involved with utility rate making. The last time we had issues like we're seeing today was when the utilities were building generation at large scale. They had rate cases every year, every 6 months, and it was just coming right and left. With grid improvement and the billions of dollars associated with that, the coal ash cleanup, the billions of dollars associated with that, if we don't figure out how to get as many participants in paying those costs, I'm not even going to call them customers at this point. I like to start using the word user, because we've got all kinds of users of the grid that need to be paying some of the freight.
Thank you. I'll let you go.
All right, Commissioner Duffley.
No questions.
Commissioner Hughes,
No questions.
and Commissioner McKissick.
Couple of questions. Mr. Floyd, first, let me thank you for your testimony. And I guess I have some questions dealing with your direct testimony that you provided. Looking at page 26 or so, and 25, 26 in that basic range. Now one thing that you do, and I guess it even goes back to page 23, you're asked to describe your vision of a comprehensive rate design structure. Are you familiar with what I'm speaking of?
Yes, sir. Now we are talking two. They're pretty identical, but whether it's Duke Progress or Duke Carolinas, they may be slightly different page numbers. But I know the section
Sorry.
you're talking about.
Yes. I'm looking right now at Duke Energy Progress. Excuse me. And of course, one thing which you mentioned, that it's been 8 years since they merged, but yet they have very different rate structures in terms of the way the rate design is situated.
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this. I mean, you talk about these various factors. You said that number one, it must be forward-looking, reflect long-run marginal costs. Number two, be focused on usage components of service that are the most cost and price sensitive. Be simple, understandable. Recover system costs in proportion to how much electricity customers use and when they use it. Give consumers appropriate information, the opportunity to respond to the information by adjusting their usage. Where possible, it needs to be dynamic. And then you go into many other components. Let me ask you this. In terms of what's being proposed at this time and what you all envision, I know you spoke more about affordability and some other components. Do you really feel like this rate design issue ought to be addressed head on?
It needs to be addressed head on. I don't know how we do it at this point in the rate cases that I have in front of me. And I'll explain it this way. Both companies, in my words, filed a status quo set of rate schedules. Very little change, structural change. But with the way utility service is going, future utility service is not going to look like it has for the last 50 years. And so we need to start thinking of different ways of how rates respond to cost of service, which is another issue. But I don't know if you want to go into that or not, but rates need to respond.
You could go into that as well. That'd be appreciated. I mean,
okay.
Because I mean, you do it in a holistic way that I think it's interesting.
It is, and James McLaughlin is our staff witness for the specific hearings. I think the rest of the week and next week. But rate design needs to be predicated on cost of service. There's a whole process. I'm kind of talking backwards here a little bit, but that cost of service is by statute based on historical data, a historical test year, whether it's the usage or the dollars they incurred to provide utility service. Those represent a test year. That's the starting point for a rate case. Once the company decides they need to improve earnings, they're going to come in for a general rate case. What I'm trying to get to in rate design, and again, stepping back from that cost of service, is that it used to be that a customer would go and hook up electricity and pay their bills, monthly bills. It didn't really matter how they used it. It didn't really matter where the costs were incurred. It was pretty standard vanilla electric utility service. They get one bill, they write a check, and they're done. Today, that looks a lot different because customers, whether it's the commercial or residential, are exercising a little bit of autonomy from the utility. Whether that is rooftop solar or larger scale solar or wind, people have a desire to try to separate their usage from Duke Energy's and Dominion. And in doing so, they are forcing cost of service to change its character, and by extension, rate design. That's why I believe at this point, we really do need to sit down and look to where the utility is going in the next few years, and to comprehensively study what rates are appropriate, what customer classes are appropriate in terms of cost of service and rate design. Whether it's electric vehicles, whether it's solar generation on rooftops, or whether it's some other something, technology. Efficiency is another piece of it that is de-emphasizing the means to obtain revenue through a kilowatt hour charge. And I go back to what I was talking about earlier, fixed cost recovery. A substantial amount of utility service, I believe, is a fixed cost question. And so any dollar that let's use you and me, for example, any dollar the utility doesn't recover from me because I'm putting solar panels, they're going to make you pay for, because ultimately they're going to come back in for a rate case if earnings fall. That starts to exacerbate this issue of utility revenues. And, you know, we'll be here again next year or the following year having this same debate if we don't start to look at these issues impacting rate design and cost of service today. That's why we want to look at a comprehensive study that takes everything into consideration. And I'll say this also, Commissioner McKissick, this is one reason the staff has had a little consternation, a little heartburn over a couple of these settlements, because these settlements are starting to pin down specific pieces of rate design and potentially cost of service that advantage certain customers. And anytime that happens, my comprehensive study that I'd like to see becomes a little less comprehensive. And so I want the commission to keep that in mind.
Observations, and I concur. I think the commission needs to move forward in doing so. How do you feel the commission could best address that in a holistic and meaningful, significant way, and get the Duke entities, as I tend to refer to them, engaged in how that can be done, rather than having them out there independently doing it?
I missed about the first 5 seconds of your question.
I'm sorry.
That's not helping. I can't hear you.
Can't hear me. Am I unmuted? It says I've been unmuted. Okay. Can you hear me now?
I do.
All right. I'm going to keep it simple. How do you feel that we can best move forward with a comprehensive rate design strategy involving the Duke entities, particularly since Duke Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas have had different processes in the past? Well, what tool, what resource, how can that be implemented moving forward? What would you recommend to the commission?
Well, a rate study is going to take some time. Going back to your original point about the differences between the Duke Progress and Duke Carolinas rate structures, in order to reconcile those, we're going to have to be careful about what we do. And that's why I feel like the public staff wants to get as many heads in the room as possible to talk about these issues, because this is a formidable task. It's going to take us a while. It cannot happen, I think, in 1 or 2 years. It's going to have to be a transition, because we're asking the North Carolina economy residential and commercial customers of Duke and Carolinas and Duke Progress to do business with the utilities a little bit differently than they are accustomed to. They need they need the chance to transition. There will be winners and losers. They will be different. And that to me is a function of a history of averaging a lot of different disparate types of users within the same class. When you look at one large group, you come up with one average rate. That typical bell curve is going to have winners and losers. Those curves are going to change. And so we just need to be careful about that. I hope the commission orders a comprehensive study. I've outlined some pieces of what I think that study ought to undertake. The commission, I would hope to give us further guidance about that. And then most of all, set a timeline. Make the parties not just sit there and talk about it, but to do something proactively to come back to the commission with tangible plan.
Thank you for your testimony. I think the commission should take this under close and diligent advisement.
All right, questions on the commission's questions?
Hi, Chair Mitchell, Thad Cully for Vote Solar. I have a few questions.
Mr. Cully, you may proceed.
And good afternoon, Mr. Floyd. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I just have a few questions following up on the line of questions from Commissioner McKissick. First, would you agree solar customers, they tend to produce best in the summer, peak hours, maybe from 1 to 5? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And would you agree that under the current cost of service allocation models, a lot of production costs are assigned to the class based on contribution to summer peaks? Is that correct?
We have a summer peaking cost of service. That's true. And but the costs are assigned to many hours, not just 1 hour, which is the cost of service methodology employed by the companies.
Right, but from a rate making perspective, would you agree if, let's say, 2,000 customers do have solar on their rooftops and are producing and contributing actually doing less contribution to peak on the summertime, that would result in a lower allocation of cost to those customers, to that class?
Under a summer coincident peak methodology, yes, it would.
And to your knowledge, in this case, has there been any analysis of whether solar customers are producing that type of benefit or not?
Well, I mean, they are through the peak that is less for a summer peak. I mean, there's a benefit to that, whether or not it's an actual dollar that accrues to the solar panel owner. I don't know about that, but in terms of cost allocation, it is a benefit.
Right, but that has not been specifically quantified and identified as a solar customer. We haven't put a number on it this time around, have we?
Yes, you're right. I don't recall that that's the case.
And you did mention bill frequency analysis. Are you familiar of whether there has been a bill frequency analysis through data responses and requests in this case for net metering customers specifically?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, so we don't know for a fact what the average usage of a net metering customer is for either DEC or DP. Is that correct?
Not the actual numerical value. You are correct, but we do know through numerous customer inquiries that the public staff receives about net metering that most of the bills that I have looked at are typically very few kilowatt hours.
Okay, but apart from those anecdotes, you see a lot of value in doing a comprehensive study and getting all this, let's say the 8760 load data for net metering customers and kind of looking at this through a cost of service lens and taking everything else into account. You see a lot of benefit in slowing down and taking that look. Is that right?
I see a lot of benefit in a comprehensive study that looks at that all the different types of users, whether they're net metered or residential homes with electric vehicles or commercial, large scale, small scale. I think we need to consider all the different types of users of the electric system in this study.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Floyd. One last question, and based on this and the need for this study, would you agree with me it's premature at this time to make a conclusion as to whether the net metering customers are producing a subsidy when we don't have the data to really understand that yet?
It is premature to change anything rate design at this time. As I sit here before you today, the company filed a status quo set of rates, what I call a status quo. It's business as usual, if you want to say it that way. We have recommended a study to look at all users. The company has agreed to do that and work with stakeholders. And so at this time, I would actually prefer that we leave things alone for the time being, get the commission's order that tells us what we're going to do and when we're going to get it done by, and then go forth and do the study. Just like I said earlier, the one example of a settlement that pins down certain pieces of rate schedules and rates is making my objective of a comprehensive rate study a little less comprehensive.
Well, thank you, Mr. Floyd. No further questions for you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, additional questions on commission's questions?
Chair Mitchell, this is David Neal.
All right, Mr. Neal.
Thank you. Mr. Floyd, in response to a question from Commissioner McKissick, before I get there, let me just clarify. You're not here testifying as the public staff's chief cost of service witness, isn't that right?
I am not the chief cost of service witness in these proceedings. I have testified to cost of service in prior rate cases. James McLaughlin is our primary witness, and he will be glad to answer your question.
Yes. Thank you. And but I do, just to address something you said in response to Commissioner McKissick, I believe I've got this quote more or less right. I believe is a fixed. I think you were talking about the current electric cost of service and said, I believe they're mostly a fixed cost. Do you recall saying that?
I do. Most utility cost, as the public staff believes, and maybe not quite as high as what the company would believe, but most of the cost of utility service are fixed. And when I say fixed, I basically mean that they do not change much by the hour of usage.
So another way of saying that, Mr. Floyd, might be to say that those are sunk costs?
Well, I don't think they're necessarily sunk costs. There's certainly some similarities to both. Sunk costs are costs that once the utility incurs and puts the plant into operation and it becomes used and useful, ratepayers are on the hook to pay and return to the company revenues that pay for those costs. They're sunk until they're fully depreciated. I don't know that they are necessarily fixed, and that's why I mentioned the timing issue. Fixed costs, in my mind, are costs that do not change materially from hour to hour to hour.
So if the commission were to take a different perspective and consider the long run marginal costs, for example, of building a distribution system that was designed to meet load, that they might have a different perspective about which of those costs are fixed and which are variable depending on the load they intended to serve. Isn't that right?
That's true, and that's some of the guidance I think I'm asking to get from the commission in this proceeding. The thing to keep in mind is that fixed cost recovery is only a portion of this debate. The other is, the means by which we recover those costs.
And finally, Commissioner McKissick asked you about some of your testimony, and I'll here reference the Duke Energy Progress direct testimony. He directed your attention to pages 23 and 24 about the what should be considered in a study of rate design. Do you remember that line of inquiry from Commissioner McKissick?
Right. Yes, I do. I'm sorry.
And you would agree that at the conclusion of those 6 items on page 24, you wrote, "These guiding principles must allow consumers and users of the electric system to, 1, connect to the utility system for no more than the cost of connecting to the grid. 2, pay for utility service in proportion to how much they use the system. And 3, receive fair and just compensation for the energy they supply to the utility system. Each of these principles should be reflected in smarter rates." Do you agree that I've correctly read your testimony?
Verbatim.
And do you agree that that same testimony appears in your Duke Energy Carolinas testimony?
It does. Verbatim.
No further questions, Chair Mitchell.
All right, any additional questions on commission's questions? Ms. Edmondson?
I just wanted to ask a couple of clarifying questions. Mr. Floyd, you're aware that the Duke has agreed to both the collaborative or the on the affordability and to do a rate design study. Isn't that correct?
Yes, they've agreed to undertake both.
All right. And you're going to be on a panel with Mr. McLaughlin to discuss cost of, well, he's the witness on cost of service and you're the witness on rates. And you're going to testify in the individual proceedings later.
We're going to try to do it that way, yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure. We'll be having an encore presentation. All right. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Floyd, I think at this point in time, there are no further questions for you, so you may step down.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Center for Biological Diversity and Appalachian Voices, you may call your witness.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. I will now call to the stand witness Rory McElmoy on behalf of the Center for Biological Diversity and Appalachian Voices.
All right, Mr. McElmoy, would you please raise your right hand? Do you affirm that the testimony you're going to shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yeah, there's a extreme feedback there, but yes, I do.
Okay, thank you. All right, Ms. Sue, you may proceed.
Thank you. Mr. McElmoy, could you please state your full name and business address for the record?
Sure. Rory McElmoy, 589 West King Street, Boone, North Carolina, 28607.
Great. And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Appalachian Voices as the Senior Energy Analyst.
And on February 18th, 2020, did you cause to be pre-filed in the Duke Energy Carolinas docket number E7 sub 1214 direct testimony consisting of 70 pages?
I did, yes.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No.
And are the answers you gave in your pre-filed direct testimony true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes, as to the facts that existed at the time that I submitted my testimony, yes, but of course, things have changed.
Great. So if asking another way, if I were to ask you the same questions here.
This is the court reporter. If you can mute, I'm getting feedback when the two of you are on at the same time. So if you two could mute when you're not speaking, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joanne. Sorry about that. So Mr. McElmoy, if I were to ask you the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Thank you. Chair Mitchell, I now move for Mr. McEmoyle's pre-filed testimony in docket number E7 sub 1214, consisting of 70 pages, to be admitted into the record in this proceeding, and further move at the appropriate time to be copied into the record as if given from the stand.
All right, hearing no objection to your motion, it's allowed.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Mr. McEmoyle, do you have a summary of your testimony?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And can you please give that summary right now to the commission?
Sure, thank you. One moment, and just to make sure you're on mute, okay. So I am the senior energy analyst, as I mentioned, at Appalachian Voices, where I do extensive research on energy policy models and analyze the impacts of particular rate structures and policies on families and local communities from an equity and affordability lens. The purpose of my testimony is to address the impacts that Duke Energy Carolina's proposal to increase rates and raise their return on equity will have on low-income households, and specifically on the household energy cost burden that they experience. Energy burden generally means the percent of gross household income that is spent on home energy costs, including all costs for electricity and non-electric heating fuels. While it doesn't get as much attention as issues like poverty or low-income housing, and in fact is wholly rejected by Duke Energy as a definable phrase, household energy burden is a serious, pervasive, and persistent economic problem faced by hundreds of thousands of households across the state. Importantly, though, the term energy burden is recognized by numerous governmental, regulatory, academic, nonprofit, and other entities throughout the United States, and even here in North Carolina. To date, the Commission itself has not explicitly considered energy burden as a factor in rate cases, and that is highly problematic. My research shows that the energy burden problem facing North Carolinians would be grossly exacerbated by Duke Energy Carolina's proposed rate increase. In my testimony, using data provided by the U.S. Department of Energy and GIS Utility Service Area shapefiles, I determined that virtually 100% of the estimated 332,000 low-income households served by DEC, which is 1 out of every 5 households served by the utility, experienced an unaffordable household energy burden in 2016, and more than 40% of those low-income households experience a high household energy burden as defined by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Using that data as a baseline, I then established an adjusted baseline of household energy burden for 2019, from which I was then able to calculate the estimated change in household energy costs, energy burdens, and the number of households exceeding these two thresholds that would result from DEC's proposed rate increase in this rate case. As a result of that modeling, I reached 3 primary conclusions. First, 1 out of every 12 households served by DEC in 2019 experienced a high energy burden, meaning that the percentage of their income spent on electricity bills is 10.9% or higher. If DEC's originally proposed rates are approved, this would increase to 1 out of every 9 households by 2021 and 1 out of every 8 households by 2025. Second, as of the date of the filing of my testimony in February 2020, DEC's proposed rate increase would result in nearly 2/3 of all low-income households served by the utility falling under the high household energy burden category by 2025, representing an increase of 50% from 2019 levels and a shift of nearly 70,000 low-income households from experiencing merely unaffordable energy costs into the high energy burden category. Third, when combined, if DEC's original request for increases in actual residential rates is approved, annual electric bills for low-income households will have increased by approximately $138 a year, or $11.48 per month on average between 2016 and 2025, representing a 10.6% increase in a decade. A large majority, 94% of that impact, would result from DEC's proposed rate increase in this case. Recent settlements would not substantively change the overall results of my analysis. Given these findings, I recommend that the Commission reject this newly negotiated rate increase. North Carolina families should not experience a higher energy burden as investors gain an artificially higher return on equity. But if the Commission decides to allow some level of increase, I have 2 recommendations in the alternative. I recommend that the Commission make energy burden a priority factor in its consideration of DEC's requested rate increase and return on equity by analyzing the impact that DEC's proposed rate increase will have on electricity costs and household energy burdens particularly for low and middle income customers, as it weighs changing economic conditions and customer ability to afford a rate increase. And second, I recommend the commission approve no higher than a 9% return on equity for DEC and a capital structure consisting of no more than a 50-50 debt to equity ratio as originally proposed by the public staff, and consider an even lower ROE that more accurately reflects both current and pre-pandemic market conditions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McElmoyle. Chair Mitchell, none of the parties have indicated that they have questions for cross-examination, so we now welcome questions from the commission.
All right, just to be abundance of caution, any cross-examination for the witness? All right, any questions from commissioners? I will call the roll. Commissioner Brown-Bland?
I have no questions.
Commissioner Gray?
No questions.
All right, Commissioner Clodfelter?
Nothing at this point.
Okay. Commissioner Duffley?
I have no questions.
Commissioner Hughes?
No questions.
And Commissioner McKissick?
No questions.
Okay, all right, Mr. McElmoyle, you are off the hook.
Thank
You
you.
may step down, sir. All right, we are now with North Carolina Justice Center and others. Mr. Neal, you may call your witness.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. At this time, we would call Mr. John Howitt to the stand.
All right, Mr. Howitt, let's go ahead and get you under oath. Do you affirm that the testimony you're about to receive shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Neal.
Thank you. Mr. Howitt, can you state your name, title, and business address for the record?
Yes, John Howitt. I'm Senior Policy Analyst at National Consumer Law Center, 7 Winthrop Square, Boston, Massachusetts.
And Mr. Howitt, on February 18th, 2020, did you cause to be pre-filed in docket number E7, sub 1214, direct testimony consisting of 35 pages as well as 8 exhibits to your direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your testimony?
I do not.
Chair Mitchell, I would move that Mr. Howitt's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record in this proceeding and copied into the record as if given orally from the stand in the DEC rate case dockets at the appropriate time, and that Mr. Howitt's exhibits attached to his testimony be marked for identification as exhibits JH1 through JH8.
All right, hearing no objection to your motion, Mr. Neal, it is allowed.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Now, Mr. Howitt, on April 13th, 2020, feels like a lifetime ago, did you cause to be pre-filed in docket number E2 sub 1219 direct testimony consisting of 32 pages as well as 6 exhibits to your direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed testimony?
No, I do not.
If I asked the same questions here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
And do you have any changes or corrections to the exhibits to your direct testimony?
No, I do not.
And Chair Mitchell, I would move that Mr. Howitt's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record in this proceeding and copied into the record as if given orally from the stand in the DEP rate case dockets at the appropriate time, and that Mr. Howitt's exhibits JH1 through JH6 be marked for identification as pre-filed.
All right, hearing no objection to your motion, it's allowed.
Thank you. Mr. Howitt, do you have a summary prepared of your joint testimony?
Yes, I do.
Can you give that summary at this time?
Yes. Good afternoon. My name is John Howitt. I'm Senior Policy Analyst at National Consumer Law Center. I'm I thank you for the opportunity to testify before the Commission. My pre-filed testimony in both the Duke Energy Carolinas and Progress rate cases addressed issues related to affordability of electric service for lower-income residential customers. I also discussed programs and policies designed to mitigate affordability challenges faced by those customers. These issues were introduced into the cases by Duke Energy North Carolina President Stephen DeMay in his testimony, in which he recognized the need for enhanced and expanded programming to support low-income bill affordability. The Commission subsequently sought additional information from public staff regarding tariffed residential rates that address affordability issues. My testimony first summarized data provided by the companies showing significant and widespread affordability problems faced by customers. It is important to note that this data predated the economic crisis customers have experienced since the COVID-19 pandemic. Payment of late charges, receipt of disconnection notices, and involuntary loss of electric service are signs that residential customers are experiencing trouble affording their electric bills. Over the past 2 years, the number of non-pay disconnections increased substantially for both companies. And both companies reported that they charge late fees to over a fifth of their residential customers, 21.5% of DEP customers and 26% of DEC customers. To address the affordability issues raised by Mr. DeMay and the Commission, I recommended consideration of a new low-income rate design and arrearage management program to be funded through uniform volumetric charges and with the following program design elements: a low-income percentage discount of at least 25%, a tiered discount setting payments at a targeted electricity burden level of approximately 5%, or a percentage of income plan lowering all participants' electricity bill payments to 5% of household income. Any discount should be applied to both the volumetric and the fixed customer charge portions of the bill. An arrearage management program to operate in conjunction with current bill reduction that allows low-income participants to write down 1/12 of total program overdue balances with each timely payment of a current bill. To sustain participants' affordability and home energy security, program design must address both participants' current bills and arrearage balances. In addition, new affordability program offerings should be developed through a collaborative process overseen by the Commission between the public staff, the companies, and interested stakeholders. Participating parties should be afforded the opportunity to file comments with the Commission regarding findings and recommendations of the stakeholder process. My testimony also addressed a recommendation that the companies expand the Helping Home Fund or offer similar comprehensive low-income energy efficiency programs as an important complement to affordable rate designs. Comprehensive low-income energy efficiency programs provide the cornerstone of low-income home energy security. The partial settlement and stipulation reached between the companies and the Justice Center et al., providing for an additional $6 million to the Helping Home Fund over the next 2 years, and commitment to develop additional low-income efficiency programs with the input of the Duke Collaborative, are welcome steps towards implementing these recommendations. Finally, I recommend that the Commission reject the $14 basic facilities charge proposed by the companies because it inappropriately reflects usage-related costs, would result in cross-subsidization, of high volume customers and would discourage, energy efficiency. Would also disproportionately harm low income, elder, and African American headed households. Reliable electricity service is a necessity of life. Without electricity, residents cannot participate effectively in present-day society or be secure from threats to health and safety. I welcome the opportunity to be involved in any affordability stakeholder process with the companies, and this concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Howitt. Chair Mitchell, no parties have indicated cross-examination of Mr. Howitt, so he is available for questions from commissioners.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Neal. Just abundance of caution. Any cross-examination for the witness? All right. Hearing none. Questions from the commissioners, beginning with Commissioner Brown-Bland.
Mr. Howitt, you were present to hear the testimony from witness Floyd. I'm just your take on his testimony and the concerns there expressed with cost and fixed costs in particular.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I did hear that cross-examination and response. A couple of responses. As an initial matter, I think we have lots of data that conclusively demonstrates the extent to which lower income households, on average, are lower volume users of electricity and home energy in general. Now, I do agree that there's variation from the mean, if you will, and that it is important to review bill frequency distributions. But I've been looking at national data from the Residential Energy Consumption Survey since the 2001 survey, and it consistently shows that lower income households, elder households in particular, but also households headed by African American and Latinx householders, again, on average, use less. And this applies to each of the regions in the country surveyed, and it's consistent over time. The biggest disparity, in response also to the comments of Mr. Floyd, the dynamic of elder households using less than their younger counterparts is as pronounced as ever. And surely this is a function of smaller dwelling units and other factors, but it's undeniable that the data shows in survey after survey that this is the case. I would also suggest that raising fixed charges does have bearing on the value of energy efficiency. And as a low-income advocate, I find that troubling. Energy efficiency really is required not only to keep bills low in low-income households, but to address various housing-related issues. And as you remove the value of energy efficiency investments, whether they come through a program such as the Helping Home Fund or some other program design, the value of that cornerstone really is undermined. And we do see I do agree that it's a matter of arithmetic fact that with increased fixed customer charges, there's a cross subsidy between that goes from lower volume consumers up to higher volume consumers.
All right, and you mentioned there about the impacts on the elder households. In that regard, and you did bring it down to the region, I was going to ask you, but in that regard, have you seen or had access to any North Carolina specific data?
The most granular geographic data from that residential energy consumption survey came in 2009. During that survey year, the region consisted of North Carolina and South Carolina. And unfortunately, didn't get any more granular than that. But one thing I can say for certain is that in each of these survey years, and the survey is conducted every 4 years, this pattern of disparities by income, race, and age of householder, it holds throughout the country and repeats year after year. So it certainly would be advantageous were the utilities in North Carolina presenting usage data by zip code or even more granular by census tract. And this way one could overlay some of the Census Bureau's demographic data, income related data, on top of that, and we could get a better sense as to that, how that dynamic exists in North Carolina.
And Mr. Howard, in just in utility regulation space, we see that you know, there are always new capital programs, and with these are bill impacts, more costs to be covered. And as the costs increase, that's related to that, and also to the expense of new technologies and other new programs and things that we desire and we want. Even energy efficiency has some cost on there's another goal on the back end of that, but in having these programs, there's costs added to the bills. Should there be should different customer sectors be considered differentially in that kind of environment? And you know, what suggestions do you have in that regard?
Well, I certainly agree with you. The capital investments review of the regulatory paradigm itself, initiation of new programs and meeting policy objectives associated with carbon reduction, that there really are many moving parts right now that at least in the short term may cause upward pressure on rates. And again, in the short term, but for lower income households, short-term cash flow is really of utmost importance. And so when you ask about particular considerations, would suggest that those who are already having trouble maintaining their energy security and staying connected to the system, that as each of these proposals comes along, that some type of equity impact assessment or bill impact assessment be included in these proposals, and that if adverse impacts are identified in the short or middle terms, that regulators, stakeholders, and the utility companies consider the full range of means of mitigating those impacts. And if I may, would suggest that the model, the percentage of income payment plan model, one of the benefits of that is that once a program like that is established, as these cost increasing endeavors are considered and perhaps ultimately approved, those qualifying customers participating in that program are essentially held harmless from an economic perspective because their bills are capped at a percentage of income. So, for example, if a new capital investment is approved that has bill impacts, maybe not just in the short term, but over time, if you cap the bill of a participating customer at 5 or 6% of household income, they essentially they don't bear the brunt of that cost increase.
And understanding that you're a low income advocate, but just in terms of the principles that Mr. Floyd addressed, and the if those costs are capped or certain customer sectors are protected from paying portions of what he looked at as fixed costs, those costs get covered somewhere. And one of our principles that we deal with and balance is this, discrimination, and not to be discriminatory in any of our decisions, but even in rates and billing paradigms, that kind of thing. Do you have any advice there or any thoughts there that we should also take into account?
Thank you for the question. And it's, I think it's a very difficult question as the utility industries and the energy industries and change at breakneck speed, and the ways in which we use energy in homes and businesses change. The cost of service paradigm, I think, is not one that we should lose sight of altogether. However, if there are ways to also incorporate consideration of policy objectives that expand beyond pure cost of service rate making, I believe there's value to that, and that we really, over time, well, sooner rather than later, perhaps, need to begin looking at such mechanisms. The idea of a low-income rate having costs picked up by other ratepayers is not new. I understand that it causes consternation among those who would like to look at rate making from a purely causation perspective, but there are at least 24 states in the country now that have programs that have been approved where costs for participant benefits are spread across the rate base. It doesn't seem to stop the world from turning as we know it in those states. Certainly the universal service ideal is an important one. As people lose access to service, the health and safety consequences can be monumental. But we would just add, more consistent with traditional cost of service rate making principles, such programs, when well designed, particularly when they're comprehensively designed to include both an arrearage management component and affordability of current bills as they come in, that the rate base as a whole can benefit through reduced account write-offs, which those are costs that get spread throughout the customer base as well. But also, we've seen in jurisdictions where some of these programs operate that the contribution to bills is higher. It's something called a bill coverage ratio if you have a well-designed comprehensive program. Yes, it's very true that there are costs associated with these programs, but I think it's only fair to view them as net costs because there are benefits as well, both to the utility system, but certainly societally. And I appreciate the question.
All right. Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, Commissioner Gray.
No questions.
Commissioner Clodfelter?
I have nothing.
Okay. Commissioner Duffley?
I just have one question that popped into my head as you were having your conversation with Commissioner Brown-Bland. Just with your experience of looking at the percentage of income payment plans that have been introduced in other states, I guess I'm wondering about a shifting of the energy burden to a different group. Has that been studied, and has there been any academic papers on that issue of shifting the energy burden from one group to a different group?
Well, I'm not aware of a paper that looks at a shifting energy burden, but there has been plenty of study that shows lower income households currently shoulder a much higher home energy burden, or even if you'd like to break it down, an electricity burden or a heating burden, however you'd like to look at it, than their higher income counterparts. And it's able to be quantified and demonstrated the extent to which such a program starts to even out that disparity a little bit. There currently are unequal home energy burdens, and such a program sort of reduces that disparity. It is important, I would agree, if I may, to be mindful of program costs and to take seriously costs shouldered by other ratepayers and to ensure administrative efficiency associated with such programs to the greatest extent possible, and to maximize and target any program benefits efficiently and carefully, so that the investment, if you will, of non-participating ratepayers is maximized.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
I have
you.
nothing. Thank you. I have nothing further.
All right, Commissioner Hughes?
Yes, in your testimony, I think you're not a big fan of prepaid, the prepaid program. At least you seem to say it's not an answer to the affordability issue. Do you see some benefits of prepaid programs? It might not solve the affordability issue, but can you just comment on anything positive you've seen in your research with those programs, or is it nothing but negative?
No, I think most modern day prepaid service program design, there are a few attributes to it. The extent to which customers are streamed information on a regular basis with respect to their usage and expenditures, this is really this is a good thing. In addition, I think the extent to which customers are provided with more tools and better tools to make small payments in small increments in advance of actually receiving a bill, or in the prepaid, there is no formal bill, but that this is another positive attribute. I would suggest, however, that these are attributes that needn't be exclusive to prepaid service. All customers who wish to receive it should gain access to real-time information about what's happening with their usage and expenditure. This can only help, and it could be offered to customers on a voluntary basis. And and this may really make sense in the time of COVID as well, but for utilities to help customers make small payments when they're able to do so, and to be able to do so affordably without incurring high transaction fees or added costs, can be helpful. But that needn't be, I would suggest, combined with the primary feature of most prepaid service, and that is when the customer's billing credits expire, there's only a very short period of time before that customer is shut off. And of course, we see with prepay, customers forfeiting their consumer protections with respect to secure notification by mail of an impending disconnection, the right to dispute a bill, the right to a deferred payment agreement. So some of the real key elements I would suggest of our consumer protection structure that's evolved over decades in the states is, by way of opinion anyway, undermined by prepay that involves shutting folks off when they run low on billing credits.
Chair Mitchell, I hate to interrupt. This is David Neal. I hated to interrupt Commissioner Hughes's question, but I just wanted to point out that the prepaid advantage was going to be covered in the DEC specific hearing, and I didn't want to prejudice Duke from their ability to cross on those issues here, since that wasn't part of his summary or the issues that were going to be addressed in the consolidated hearing.
All right, thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Neal. All right, Commissioner Hughes, any additional questions?
No further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner McKissick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. And of course, I was looking at your direct pre-filed testimony in the Duke Energy Carolinas case. And in that testimony, you discuss different programs or models that I guess are in place in other jurisdictions dealing with debt forgiveness. And I guess you talked about a one-time forgiveness model and then another one where people would, if they made timely payments, it would be written off in like 1/12 payment, 1/12 of their debt per month over about a year. Now, can you tell me where you've seen these type of models successfully implemented?
Sure. And thank you for the question. A number of the states that offer a percentage of income plan, Ohio included, where Duke subsidiaries operate, are combined with arrearage reduction. I think in Ohio, Commissioner, the pay down, the number of current payments required to retire a pre-program arrearage balance is 24 months, and I would think that's a little bit too long. But there are other states that don't offer a PIP, but offer a different structured discount. Massachusetts is one. The state of Maryland has an arrearage reduction program. Colorado is yet another state where customers are able to retire arrears over time. I believe Indiana has one or more of the gas utilities have an arrearage reduction or arrearage management feature. Connecticut is another state. Anyway, that's all that comes to mind right off the top of my head, but would certainly be willing to take a look and come up with a more comprehensive list if that would be appropriate or desired.
Yes, and there's one additional follow-up. I noticed in your testimony you also mentioned automatic enrollment in certain types of, I guess, discounted rate type programs for people who receive public assistance, such as Medicaid, food stamps, or made within 150% of a pre-established low-income housing energy assistance program standard. Can you speak a little bit more to jurisdictions that have done that? Or was that simply a concept that you were introducing?
No, the first I heard of this was in the state of Texas. That state used to have a low-income discount program that has since, unfortunately, from my view, been done away with, or the fund got raided. But Pennsylvania has a similar model. Again, Massachusetts, there are basically data transfers between some of the health agencies, housing agencies, and the utility companies. I believe California has includes such an approach. So again, I would welcome the opportunity to compile a more comprehensive list and be happy to share those findings. But it's not a unique concept. I didn't just dream that up. This has been underway and implemented successfully. If I may just add, when we were able to get this structure implemented in Massachusetts, our enrollment among income eligible households in our flat discount rate in Massachusetts increased, and we're able to get more people into affordable payments than otherwise would have. So it can be a useful means of reducing some of the administrative costs and doing a better job in meeting some of the affordability objectives that's behind these programs in the first place.
Thank you for providing that information as it relates to those two questions. I don't know if it's appropriate to file some type of late filed exhibit that provides that information, or whatever the most appropriate vehicle would be. That would be helpful. Madam Chair, I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right, any questions on the commissioner's questions?
Madam Chair, I have one or two.
All right, Mr. Page.
Mr. Howard, my name is Bob Page. I represent the Carolina Utility Customers Association. It's a group of large industrial manufacturing customers. And I wanted to follow up with you just for a little bit on some of the questions and answers you had with Commissioner Brown Bland. I will say that I'm not at all unsympathetic with what you're doing, because when I was in college, I considered myself to be a low-income residential customer, but fortunately, that no longer applies. In any event, you and Commissioner Brown Bland were talking about maybe some of the areas in which, according to your views, cost of service principles shouldn't be strictly applied to low-income residential customers. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I think if I could expand on that a little bit, I think they need to be applied, but that the policy objectives associated with utility rate making and cost allocation should be incorporated into the process as well. I hope that isn't too fuzzy an answer for you.
Would it be fair to say that, carried to its logical conclusion, your ideas would likely result in low-income customers not paying their full allocated cost of service, and those costs would be paid by other classes or individuals of customers?
I think that, yes. I think, the short answer is yes, that's true. That a discount similar to a direct service industrial customer receiving an economic development rate involves policy objectives and principles that go beyond pure cost causation.
All right, sir. And my question is, and I don't mean to apply anything in the nature of a purgative to it, but for this sort of, as it were, social or economic engineering, don't you think the commission would be well advised to leave that to the General Assembly and programs that are funded by everybody's taxpayer dollars rather than funded by other customers who are not responsible for those costs?
I believe, I'm not a lawyer, but some friends I have who are lawyers tell me that there have been cases where a commission acting on its own initiative to approve just such a rate have been upheld. I'd be happy to discuss with council the feasibility of providing those to you, but would also suggest that even when you read some of the philosophers like Bondbright, he talks about the extent to which cost of service rate making is an imperfect art rather than a very strict science. I don't believe there's perfection in the current cost of service model, and policy objectives associated with economic development, environmental quality, and other societal objectives. It seems we do have precedents for in utility decisions in states across the country.
Professor Bondbright's work has stood the test of time pretty well, hasn't it, Mr. Howard?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's all the questions I have. I do want to tell you, I'm just fascinated by your collection of guitars, and I hope you can come back and play them for us sometime.
That would be a pleasure.
Thank you. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Any additional questions on commission's questions?
Chair Mitchell, if there are none, I have just, I think, one.
All right. Well, here's where we are. I need to give the court reporter a break. She has been transcribing for more than 2 hours at this point, and so she needs a break. So we will take a 10-minute break, and we will come back. We will go off the record, and we will come back on at 4:26.
Please turn off your video.
right, let's go back on the record, please. All right, Mr. Neal, I believe we are with you. Questions on the commission's questions?
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. And with the additional 10 minutes, of course, I thought of one more. Mr. Howitt, in your discussions with Commissioner Brown-Bland, you discussed this tension between cost of service principles and competing public policy directives. Do you recall that discussion?
Yes.
And I recognize you're not a lawyer and that you work around the country, but I think you mentioned the principle of universal service. Is that right?
Yes.
And so I'm going to read you from the Declaration of Policy of the North Carolina Public Utilities Act and just ask if this is the kind of thing you had in mind. This is from 60 NC General Statute 62-2A, subsection 3, the policy of the state here with regard to utilities. To promote adequate, reliable, and economical utility service to all of the citizens and residents of the state. Is that the kind of principle you had in mind?
Yes.
Also, following up on that discussion you had with Commissioner Brown-Bland, as it regard the impact of the company's capital investments on rates, I recall you testified that a program like percentage of income payment plans can hold low-income customers harmless. Isn't it also true that the settlement in this case for a $6 million Helping Home Fund contribution and the reduced return on equity, for example, will also help some extent with these affordability issues?
Without a doubt.
That's all I have, Chair Mitchell. At this time, I would move that Mr. Howitt's direct exhibits that have been marked for identification as exhibits JH1 through JH8 he entered into the record in the DEC rate case dockets and copied into that record at the appropriate time.
Hearing no objection, your motion is allowed.
And Chair Mitchell, I would move that Mr. Howitt's direct exhibits that have been marked for identification as exhibits JH1 through JH6 be entered into the record in the DEP rate case dockets and copied into that record at the appropriate time.
Hearing no objection, your motion is allowed.
And finally, Chair Mitchell, there was some request for some late filed exhibits from Mr. Howitt. If the chair would allow, we would happily work to put together as a late filed exhibit with Mr. Howitt's assistance some information responsive to Commissioner McKissick's question about examples of automatic enrollment in these programs, if I've captured that correctly.
That's what my notes reflect. Commissioner McKissick, I'll let you add anything further at this time.
I think that's the critical thing, and likewise, places where they're doing the low-income discount programs. So both of those that we touched upon, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you.
And I would be happy. Thank you, Commissioner McKissick. And I'd be happy to add to that examples where commissions have instituted percentage of income payment programs or the like without legislative enactment, if that would please the commission.
You may do so, Mr. Neal.
And finally, I believe Commissioner Duffley had a question about studies that I wasn't sure if Commissioner Duffley was asking for a late filed exhibit with respect to that. Was seeking clarity.
Mr. Neal, if you would like to provide any type of study that's been done on these programs and to see what type of cost shifts occurred, that would be welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Duffley. So we will do so. Thank you.
All right. With that, Mr. Howitt, we appreciate your being here with us today, and you may step down.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell.
Thank you. All right. My notes indicate that we have come to the end of these consolidated hearings. I will entertain any motions should anyone need to make one at this time. All right, hearing none, we will close these consolidated hearings and we will go off the record. All right, and I will just let you all know that the commission will issue an order. Not sure if we're going to be able to get it out today, just given the hour, but we will issue an order setting the date and time for beginning the DEC specific proceeding for this Thursday at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we will just to reiterate, we will begin the DEC specific proceeding this Thursday, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we will continue as long as necessary. All right. With that, I appreciate the attention to detail and the effort that you all have expended during this proceeding. This has been quite a monumental endeavor for everyone. I know that, and I respect that, and I appreciate that. I look forward to 2 days away from the computer screen, and I will see you all again on Thursday. Thank you very much.